بكم في مركز أبوظبي الوطني للمعارض. الرجاء الانتباه إلى تعليمات السلامة التالية في حالات الطوارئ. أولاً، تحلى بالهدوء. في حال حدوث أي أمر طارئ، قم بتفعيل أقرب نقطة إنذار حريق. اتصل بمركز أدنك للأمن والسلامة على 02 406 4444. أبلغهم بطبيعة الحالة الطارئة وحدد موقعها. قم باختار جميع الزوار في المنطقة المحيطة. قم بالمساعدة فقط إن كنت قد حصلت على التدريب الخاص بالتعامل مع الحالات الطارئة. تجنب المصاعد الكهربائية أثناء الطوارئ. هذه هي خطة الإخلاء والطوارئ. اتبع الأسهم الخضراء لمغادرة المبنى. هناك 8 نقاط للتجمع حول المبنى. جميع مخارج الطوارئ موضحة بصندوق أخضر ومصباح للإنذار في الأعلى. إذا لزم الأمر للإخلاء، توجه لأقرب نقطة تجمع. شكراً على وقتكم ونتمنى لكم قضاء يوم سعيد. أدنك من أجل سلامتكم.
Welcome to the Abu Dhabi National Exhibition Centre. Please pay your attention to the following emergency safety instructions. First, stay calm. In case of any emergency, immediately activate the nearest fire alarm point. Call ADNEC Security Control on 02 406 4444. Give them the exact nature of the emergency and the location. Alert other people in the immediate vicinity. Help only if you were trained in dealing with the emergency. Never use elevators during emergency. Here is the building evacuation route plan. Exit the building by following the green arrows. There are 8 assembly points around the building, each marked by a large green box with a small hazard light on top. If required, evacuate to the nearest assembly points. Thanks for your time and have a nice day.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will start shortly. Kindly take your seats. Thank you.
They want a higher table. I think he's one of the guests. words of God.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Kindly take your seats. We are starting now. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sabah al khair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is May Ali Sayyid, and I'm honored to be your host for today, for the first International Congress of Arabic Publishing and Creative Industries. Now, we kindly ask you to rise as we observe a moment of silence in memory of His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who passed away on May 13th. May Allah Almighty grant him eternal peace. Kindly rise. Thank you. Thank you. Kindly take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Abuظbي Arabic Language Center, it is our privilege and honor to have you all with us here today. The Congress will showcase the latest trends in publishing, highlighting the adaptation of books into other formats, and explore how different media can thrive as the business of storytelling evolves. And now I would like to leave you with a short video. Thank you. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, what a beautiful short film that showcases exactly why we are here today. We are almost ready to get started on our exciting agenda for today, but please allow me to mention a few housekeeping notes and pointers. Firstly, we highly appreciate if you can kindly keep your phones on silent during the Congress. A real-time two-way translation services are available in Arabic and in English. Channel 1 is Arabic and Channel 2 is English. Please use the headsets provided at your seats, or you can ask our ushers around here to support you. There will be a dedicated time for the Q&A at the end of each session. We encourage you all to ask questions and participate. Please do engage. You can use the Mentimeter online portal on your phones to submit your questions from the comfort of your seat, and they will be automatically listed for the moderators and speakers to address. To use the portal, simply log on to www.menti.com or scan the QR code on screen. When you access the Mentimeter, you will be asked for the 8-digit number. Insert the code shown to add your questions in English or in Arabic during each session. Once the QR code is shown on screen, the Q&A is open for you to access. A free Wi-Fi is available, provided by ADNIC. Lunch will be served at 12:30 until 1:30 in the conference hall B, just opposite to our hall area here. We will also have a 15-minute coffee breaks during the day, served in the lobby outside the hall. And feedback survey will be opened after lunch and during our coffee break. We truly value your feedback. So please assure that you fill it in. It will take only a couple of minutes. And of course, in return, we'll be providing you with a detailed report on the findings from this Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, and now we are thrilled to begin our first Congress of Arabic Publishing and Creative Industries. For the opening remarks of the Congress, please join me in welcoming to the stage His Excellency Dr. Ali bin Tamiim, Chairman of the Abuظبي Language Center.
شيخة بودور القاسمي، شخصية المؤتمر، وضيفتنا الكريمة رئيسة الاتحاد الدولي للناشرين، الشخصية التي نحتفي بها في هذا المؤتمر لدورها الكبير والواضح والمؤثر إقليمياً ودولياً. أصحاب السعادة، ضيوفنا الأجلاء، السيدات والسادة، فقدت الإمارات وفقد العالم العربي وفقدت الإنسانية المغفور له الشيخ خليفة بن زايد آل نهيان، الذي انتقل إلى رحاب ربه راضياً مرضياً. لذلك نعزي أنفسنا ونعزيكم بهذا الفقد الجلل. وقد تم انتخاب صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان حفظه الله رئيساً للدولة، وهو تحول تاريخي يؤسس لمرحلة جديدة تقود دولة الإمارات إلى ذروة التقدم والازدهار. يسعدني أن أرحب بكم في المؤتمر الدولي الأول للنشر العربي والصناعات الإبداعية، وإنه لمن دواعي السرور أن نكون جميعاً اليوم مجتمعين لمناقشة هذا الأمر الذي نحتاجه، خاصة حينما نأتي إلى اللغة العربية والكتاب العربي. سعينا جميعاً جاهدين كي يبصر النور هذا المؤتمر، نستهل من خلال هذا الحدث فصلا جديدا في مسيرة معرض أبوظبي الدولي للكتاب. نواصل العمل برؤية وإرث المغفور له الشيخ خليفة بن زايد آل نهيان رحمه الله لترسيخ مكانة أبوظبي مركزا ثقافيا للعالم. نستذكر في ذلك قوله: لا تكبر الشعوب بالتمني ولكن بالعمل والإنجاز. لقد كنا من أكثر المؤمنين بصناعة النشر والمحتوى العربي على مدى سنوات طويلة، واعتقدنا دوما بأحقية اللغة العربية في أن يعرف الناس ما تتمتع به من خصائص، وما فيها من سمات، وما فيها من ثروة مهولة تستحق أن ننصت لها ونعتني بها. اللغة هي التعبير الخالص عن الثقافة الصافي النقي، ولهذا نعتز بلغتنا العربية التي لها عظيم الأثر في التعبير عن ثقافتنا والحفاظ عليها ومشاركتها مع العالم من خلال تدعيم صناعة النشر والإبداع وإثراء محتواها، بالإضافة إلى دعم صناعه. وإنها لتعطينا القدرة على أن نتواصل مع العالم نظراً لما تحتويه من إرث عظيم يقوم على المحبة والتسامح. يجمع مؤتمرنا اليوم أبرز الناشرين والمؤلفين وصانعي المحتوى ورواد الأعمال للتعاون والابتكار ومناقشة حاضر ومستقبل النشر العربي. يمكننا أن نصبح جميعا اليوم جزء من حقبة ثقافية جديدة تدعم المجتمعات والنمو الاقتصادي، حيث تكمن مهمتنا في تشارك إبداعات الكلمة المكتوبة والشعر والموسيقى والأفلام والفن مع المجتمع. لقد أثبتت أبوظبي التزامها ببناء قطاع ثقافي مستدام عبر استثمار 30 مليار درهم كجزء من استراتيجيتها الرامية لدعم الصناعة الثقافية الإبداعية. تعمل حالياً على تمكين المواهب من جميع أنحاء العالم، تساهم في إنشاء المحتوى والألعاب الإلكترونية والأفلام والنشر باللغة العربية. يعد المركز الإبداعي الجديد في جزيرة ياس خير دليل على أن الإمارة قادرة على احتضان جميع أنواع الأفراد والشركات الناشئة وكبار منتجي المحتوى معاً للعيش والعمل وتحقيق الازدهار في ربوعها. وبإلهام من صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس الدولة حفظه الله، نواصل تنظيم الأحداث المهمة مثل معرض أبوظبي الدولي للكتاب برعايته الكريمة، دعماً للثقافة والإبداع وللكلمة المكتوبة. لا تزال رحلتنا في إثراء المحتوى العربي في بدايتها، وإذ نؤمن دائماً بإحراز التقدم حتى وإن بدا الهدف كبيراً. هذا ما نسعى لتحقيقه بجهود سفراء النشر والصناعات الإبداعية والتعليم والثقافة في هذا المؤتمر. العمل يداً بيد للاستفادة من مرونة العالم الرقمي المليء بالفرص في سبيل تدعيم أواصر صناعة النشر وروابطها مع الصناعات الإبداعية التي تترجم الكلمة المكتوبة إلى واقع رقمي لزيادة آفاق استخدامها. ختاماً، أود الترحيب مجدداً بالشيخة بدور القاسمي معنا، ضيفة شرف المؤتمر، لدورها الريادي في دعم المحتوى العربي وتحولاته في سياقاته الأصيلة المتجددة والمعتمدة على الصناعات الإبداعية. ونفخر بها كونها تتصدر هذا الدعم من خلال كافة المحافل العالمية بصفتها الشخصية الاعتبارية، وبصفتها أيضاً الشخصية بوصفها رئيسة اتحاد الناشرين الدوليين. أدعوها للمنصة لإلقاء كلمتها، وأنه لفخر لنا أن تشرفنا الآن بكلمتها، وأنه لفخر لي أن أنصت لها وأن أكون أيضا بينكم جميعا وأستمع إليكم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نلتقي اليوم وقد ودعت دولتنا المغفور له بإذن الله الشيخ خليفة بن زايد آل نهيان منذ أيام قليلة. الشيخ خليفة الذي قاد مسيرة التمكين الاقتصادي والاجتماعي، وكان له أثر طيب على القطاع الثقافي أيضاً. ونلتقي اليوم ونحن مستبشرون بقيادة صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس الدولة حفظه الله لمسيرة دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، ونحن متفائلون بقيادة سموه لدولتنا نحو المزيد من التنمية والتطور والازدهار في كافة المجالات. وشكراً للقائمين على معرض أبوظبي الدولي للكتاب ومركز أبوظبي للغة العربية على تنظيم هذه النسخة الأولى من المؤتمر الدولي للنشر العربي والصناعات الإبداعية. وشكراً لدعوتكم الكريمة للمشاركة معكم اليوم. يقال إن طرح الأسئلة الصحيحة هو نصف حل المشكلة، وقد اطلعت على برنامج الجلسات الحوارية لهذا المؤتمر ولاحظت أن أكثر من نصفها له عنوان على شكل سؤال. على سبيل المثال، إحدى الجلسات عنوانها: هل أصبحت منصات وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي سوقاً جديداً للكتب؟ وهناك جلسة أخرى بعنوان: هل القارئ هو المؤلف الجديد؟ وكلمة رئيسية بعنوان: كيف يمكن للدول اختيار توجهات في الكتب الرقمية والصوتية؟ إنها أسئلة جوهرية ومهمة، وستسهم حتماً في توجيه وتعميق الحوار في الموضوعات المطروحة للوصول إلى حلول وأفكار جديدة لتطوير قطاع النشر العربي والصناعات الإبداعية. ويشهد قطاع النشر العربي خلال السنوات الماضية حراكاً نشطاً ونقاشات داخلية كثيرة بدأت ترسخ فهماً جديداً للدور الكبير الذي يلعبه ويمكن أن يلعبه قطاع النشر، ليس فقط لدعم التنمية الثقافية بل أيضاً لتعزيز التنمية الشاملة لشعوب المنطقة. ولا شك أن هذا الحراك هو خطوة في المسار الصحيح، ولكنه يحتاج منا إلى وضع أسس وقواعد متينة حتى نتمكن من بناء قطاع نشر عربي قوي ومرن وقادر على الاستمرار لسنوات طويلة قادمة. ومن بين أهم أسس نجاح قطاع النشر على المدى البعيد في أي منطقة في العالم هو الالتزام الكامل بمبادئ احترام الملكية الفكرية وحرية النشر. بصفتي رئيسة للاتحاد الدولي للناشرين، قمت بزيارة العديد من الناشرين العرب في دول مثل مصر والسعودية والمغرب وتونس وغيرها، وقد لمست من خلال حواراتي معهم الشغف والحماس نحو مواصلة الاستثمار في المواهب المحلية وتشجيع المحتوى المحلي وتوسيع دور التكنولوجيا في أعمالهم. ولكن معظمهم أبدى تخوفاً من وضع حماية حقوق الملكية الفكرية وحرية النشر حالياً، خاصة بعد الارتفاع الغير مسبوق للقرصنة الرقمية منذ بداية جائحة كورونا. فيجب علينا الانتباه جيداً لهذه التخوف وأن نعمل مع جميع الأطراف المعنية من أجل تعزيز ثقة الناشرين لمواصلة الاستثمار وتطوير أعمالهم في المستقبل. ونحن نعمل في الاتحاد الدولي للناشرين جنباً إلى جنب مع أعضائنا في العديد من بلدان العالم من أجل وضع الأطر القانونية وآليات تنفيذ المتابعة المناسبة لحماية الملكية الفكرية وحرية النشر. الحضور الكريم، تمر صناعة النشر بتحولات أساسية ليس فقط بسبب الجائحة بل أيضاً بسبب الوتيرة المتسارعة للتقدم التكنولوجي. فاحتياجات القراء وسلوكياتهم تتغير بسرعة، وخيارنا الوحيد هو مواكبة توجهاتهم وقبول التغير للمحافظة على دور ومكانة صناعة النشر عند القراء. وبينما أدركت أسواق كثيرة هذا الواقع الجديد في وقت مبكر، تأخرت أسواق أخرى في التأقلم معه، إلى أن استفاق العالم على أزمة جائحة كورونا. فتغيرت المفاهيم، وأصبح الجميع على أتم الاستعداد للتغير والتأقلم. وفي هذا السياق أكدت منذ بداية الجائحة على أن هذه الأزمة هي فرصة ذهبية لكل الناشرين في أنحاء العالم لمواكبة التغيرات وتغيير نماذج العمل والتخلي من عقلية الماضي، وإعطاء الفرصة للمواهب الشابة المتنوعة لصنع القرار وتعزيز الابتكار ودعمه بأفكار جديدة ومبدعة. كما أكدنا في الاتحاد الدولي للناشرين من خلال مبادرة إنسباير على ضرورة تعزيز التعاون والتضامن بين الناشرين وبين كافة أطراف المعنية بما فيهم المكتبات ومعارض الكتب والكتاب والمطابع وشركات التوزيع والتكنولوجيا وغيرها. ومن أجل تشجيع الناشرين على التأقلم مع التغير الرقمي التكنولوجي السريع، أطلق الاتحاد مؤخراً أكاديمية الاتحاد الدولي للناشرين في مارس الماضي، وهي منصة رقمية توفر مواد تدريبية على مستوى عالمي ونصائح من مديرين تنفيذيين عالميين ذوي خبرة كبيرة في قطاع النشر. وهذه المنصة متاحة مجانياً للأعضاء، وأشجعكم على الاستفادة منها ومن جميع فرص التدريب المتاحة. السيدات والسادة، أتمنى أن تواصلوا طرح الأسئلة مهما كانت صعبة أو معقدة، فنحن نشهد حالياً ميلاد فصل جديد في تاريخ قطاع النشر، فصل يحتاج منا فهماً عميقاً لكل التحولات المرحلية والتأقلم معها بأسرع وقت لكي نستمر ونواصل المسيرة. أتمنى لكم التوفيق في كل جهودكم والنجاح في جلسات هذا المؤتمر، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكراً لك، شكراً الشيخة بدور القاسمي على الكلمة الرائعة، وشكراً لدعمك. شكراً Your Excellency دكتور علي بن تميم على دعمك لهالحدث الرائع واللي أول من نوعه بالعالم وبالشرق الأوسط. Thank you very much, Sheikha Bodour Al Qasimi, for this beautiful, inspiring speech. And thank you, Your Excellency Dr. Ali bin Tamim, for all your support. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the status of Arabic publishing? How can countries choose their own path in e-books and audiobooks? What does the future hold for Arabic content on the internet? What is the golden ratio of innovation? These are some of the questions that will be explored today with our keynote speakers and panelists, bringing together publishers, content creators, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs from different platforms. And now, it is time for our first keynote speech, the 70-20-10 model for innovation in publishing by Anne Hayat. Anne Hayat is best-selling author, executive consultant, speaker, and investor. She's a Silicon Valley veteran with 15 years of experience and has been on hundreds of stages across 5 continents. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Anne on stage.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you for the incredible hospitality I have already experienced here. I am thrilled to be back in the UAE. This is my third time visiting, and so far the best. I am honored to be presenting at the very first International Congress of Arabic Publishing and Creative Industries. And my talk today is hopefully going to give a framework upon which the ideas and inspiration that is to follow my address can be structured. I have worked in Silicon Valley for 15 years, first at Amazon in the earliest years of its development. From 2003 till 2005, I worked directly for Jeff Bezos, literally in the desk physically closest to his in the entire company. And I learned his thought process and his model for innovation. Then I moved to California to begin a PhD at Berkeley, not in technology, in something completely unrelated, studying international relations, which is dear to my heart. And then I was recruited from that program and worked at Google for 15 years. I worked at Google from 2006 until 2018. And since then, I have been doing consulting for startup companies across the world to help them replicate the models of innovation that I learned at these two revolutionary companies. So my talk today is giving you those lessons of innovation that you can then take into your companies, into your publishing world, and to implement a lot of the ideas that you're going to hear from our experts today. Now is a time of major disruption. And as we've just heard in the introductions, there is an incredible opportunity to adopt new practices and to really accelerate the progress of publishing in completely new ways. So I'd like to start my remarks by establishing the foundation of innovation within the publishing world. There is a rich history here. This is the roots upon which you can call for now in your modern innovations. Publishing has been something that's been important to humans from the beginning of time, whether that was through original oral histories or through cave paintings. Eventually, we wanted to take these stories with us. We wanted to bring that culture into new places and share those new ideas with others that we met. And that really started here in the Middle East, with stone and clay tablets that took those ideas portable into new areas. Then we had the evolution into papyrus developed in Egypt, and then eventually paper produced through China. And this gave us an opportunity to share our stories, our heritage, and our values with the rest of the world. And innovation really paused there for about 400 years. We had scrolls and codex form books coexisting for more than 400 years, until a very important moment in time happened in 1455 with the invention of Gutenberg's printing press. And that is very analogous to the moment we're experiencing now. In the years between 1455 and the end of the 15th century, the number of European manuscripts went from just a few thousand to 9 million in less than 50 years. We are now experiencing that with the opportunities of digital publications, of multimedia, of social media coming into allowing, really democratizing the opportunity to share our ideas with the rest of the world. This is an incredible opportunity for the publishing industry, because what happened after Gutenberg's invention wasn't only a single invention, he created a brand new industry. He created a need for curation of ideas and stories, for someone to front the financial costs and risks of putting those ideas into the world, of creating pipelines of distribution, and that is how the publishing industry was born. Now there's an incredible opportunity to do that again, but it is going to be in very different ways, because now creation is in the hands of many, many users. And so there's an opportunity to add a new level of expertise into this production cycle. So what I'm going to present to you today is often referred to as the golden ratio. The golden ratio was not invented by me. This has been studied by academics all over the world, and I'm taking the framework today from a few papers published by Harvard Business Review that break the golden ratio down into the 70-20-10 model. So I want to introduce a concept that we talk about a lot in Silicon Valley called moonshots. Moonshots is a term that was started in the 1960s with John F. Kennedy's announcement that he wanted to put a man on the moon for the very first time. At the time of this announcement, that was completely unfathomable for the United States program into space. NASA was not yet capable of that type of mission, but within 7 years, that mission was accomplished. So now we take this term, moonshots, from that incredibly ambitious project into accomplishing seemingly impossible things. A colleague of mine, Pablo Rodriguez, is an incredible moonshot thinker, and he's a great example of this modern 70-20-10 way of conducting business. Pablo Rodriguez worked first at Google X, as now it's simply referred to by the letter X, which is a moonshot factory. Google was the very first technology company to create a completely separate division for radical ideas, for dreaming and inventing the future. And Pablo said this about that work, which I feel is particularly appropriate for this room full of publishers and creatives. He said, "We live in a time of chaos and disruption, a time between two stories, one that does not serve us anymore and the other that has yet to be written. We can't predict the future, but we can build for it." And that is what we're all here together today to do, is to be inspired for what we're going to build next. So this is the framework of the golden ratio, 70, 20, and 10. 70 represents the core offerings that you are giving to your customers and clients today. This 70% core offering is something that's already been proven by models. You have built out key performance indicators, you have very detailed dashboards, you know exactly your product market fit. You have confidence that what you're doing is working because you have the data to back it up. The 20% is the areas of innovation and opportunity that lie just outside of that offering, where you're taking some calculated risks based on data sets, and you are moving forward with confidence that they will help you attract new clients and customers, new partnerships, new opportunities, but within that same skill set of offerings in your 70% core. And then we have something that academics call the transformational. This is what is normally invested in about 10% of your revenue, talent, and energies put into 10%. I would be willing to bet that everyone in this room has a firm understanding of their 70% core offerings and your 20% adjacent, but the 10% is where the magic lies. And now in my consulting work, this is where I see the most difficulties arising, because 10% transformational investments must be managed completely differently than the rest of your company. And this is an important distinction because over time, the relationship between revenue and your business model is inverse. We can see that this over time turns upside down. What today is your 70% core offering that provides most of your revenue, over time will only produce 10% of your overall results. So this is a cycle of innovation and disruption that happens across time. And what's most interesting to me and what gets me most excited in my work is consulting for companies who are taking their 10% moonshot, seemingly crazy ideas and allowing them to transfer that into what will become their new base, their new 70% of their revenue. So I'd like to illustrate this with a few examples that I've seen in my career, both at Amazon and Google. I was at Amazon in the very, very early years of the company, and I watched Jeff Bezos make some very calculated risks that at the time seemed crazy. An example of this is Amazon Web Services. We had an idea that they wanted to democratize access to the internet, and at the time, the computing power alone was prohibitively expensive for startups. It was only accessible for those with a heavy revenue base, for example, research institutes at universities or other large major organizations. But Jeff saw a vision where everyone could participate in this thing called the internet, and he wanted to make that accessible and affordable for anyone with a big idea. So that was the original idea that became Amazon Web Services. When Jeff Bezos pitched that to their board of directors, they were terrified. They did not see how that was related to the core business of modern e-commerce, we were still struggling to get people to trust e-commerce online. Put their credit card online was a very alarming experience for most people. They thought that Amazon Web Services was a distraction from that core offering, because at this point, the company was not yet profitable, which I know is a hard moment in time to remember when Amazon was not yet profitable, but it was a huge risk to invent in such an expensive venture. Now, something really special happened here that was an accidental example of the 70-20-10 golden ratio. Jeff Bezos asked a very, very talented engineer to spearhead this project. That engineer had a family emergency. He was originally from South Africa, and he needed to go home to be with his family. So he took his work in inventing Amazon Web Services home and was working in this in a silo, alone without his colleagues and alone without his community of engineers. So when he perfected it and they were ready to launch, he came back to Seattle, Washington, and Andy Jassy was the president of this new venture called Amazon Web Services. Andy Jassy is now Jeff Bezos' successor as CEO of Amazon. But because this project had been invented in obscurity, alone in South Africa, it suddenly hit the Silicon Valley by storm. No one saw it coming, so they had no competitors. And what seemed like a crazy idea that almost did not receive board of director approval quickly became an independent, multi-billion-dollar subsidiary company. The perfect example of the golden ratio converting into the future of Amazon and their revenue stream. I also saw this happen at Google. At Google, you might remember something happened that seemed a little bit crazy. They reorganized the company and became Alphabet. No one understood what that meant when we first did it. But it was Larry and Sergey, the co-founders of Google, it was their vision to restructure the company in a way that would allow for the golden ratio. And there's a few reasons this is important. There are 3 different ways that your 10% transformational investments need to be managed very differently than your 70% core or your 20% adjacent. The 3 categories begin with the people. The talent that you need to run your core offerings is almost always extremely different than you need for your transformational projects. The talent needed for your core offerings and your adjacent projects are people who are very analytical. They understand how to read a dashboard, they know how to make calculated risks, they know how to hit their key performance indicators every single quarter. What you need from your transformational talent is you need people who are insatiably curious, who just ask all of the right questions without being burdened by finding an answer today. They are people who are able to work with massive amounts of ambiguity and then to come to a result. That kind of thrill of the pursuit needs to be at the core of their passions. The second category of different ways of managing your corporate structure is in management and metrics. The way you manage your core business is through those KPIs, your core performance indicators. You know exactly how to measure success. You reward and you promote and you incentivize your employees according to hitting those targets. With transformational investments, it is the direct opposite. They need to be motivated not by what we're going to earn from your work this quarter or this year, but what we're going to learn. You are always solving for what are we going to learn from this, because otherwise it's really hard to know if your efforts are worthwhile, because the time scale of transformational efforts are much longer than your core and adjacent offerings. And the third category is in the adaptation of these teams. Your core and adjacent teams need to be at your headquarters. They need to be highly collaborative. They need to be seeing each other all the time. This is where they are the keepers of your culture. But with your 10% transformational teams, it is most effective, and this has been studied exhaustively by research scientists. They are more effective when they are literally in a satellite, physically separated from the rest of your team, as we saw with Amazon Web Services and then at Google. At Google, once they restructured for Alphabet, they made a big bet. And I have to admit, when Larry, Sergey announced this idea, even I thought he was a little bit crazy. He wanted to get into driverless cars. And it felt very much like that moment when the board of directors at Amazon said, Amazon Web Services is not related to our core product offering. This feels like a distraction. Having Larry and Sergey be driven to produce the first driverless cars felt to me like a distraction from a search company whose core mission was to organize the world's information and make it universally useful and accessible. But this actually really did tie to their core mission, because if you trace back the company that became Waymo, we can see it is part of the core Amazon principles. First, they had the idea of maps. Then that led to Street View, where you could see images of every street in the world. That led to autonomous driving instructions that we're now also accustomed to, which required advancements in artificial intelligence. So we're inching our way towards the technologies necessary for driverless cars. And then they made the big bet. Then they took even those core offerings into a transformational place, and they had to invent proprietary lasers and advancements in artificial intelligence that had never happened before, work with local governments and policies, and now this is potentially the wave of the future. So the 70-20-10 model is a framework upon which I think you can take all of the incredible ideas that come to you today. And as our amazing president of the IPA pointed out, the most important part of today is probably asking the really hard questions, not necessarily in the answering of them, but asking ourselves, where are we going to take our influence and our opportunities? How can we invest in the future? So I'd like to issue each of you 3 challenges as you take your notes and your ideas with you at the end of today. I'd like you to do 3 things. The first is to come together with your teams and come to an agreement of your vision for how you want to innovate going forward. If you don't all have the same scorecard, it is very difficult to make progress. So sit down and really get into the details of your risk tolerance, your timeframes, and where you think your individual opportunities lie. My second challenge to you is to then do a very detailed audit of where you're putting your time, your talent, your recruitment efforts, how you're incentivizing your employees, and seeing if that correlates with this new scorecard or playbook that you have. And the third is that you then communicate this often and relentlessly with your employees. This is not a speech you can just give once. This needs to be part of your culture and your dialogue in every meeting, in every promotion, in every performance review. This needs to be part of the discussion because it needs to be pervasive in your culture in order to have this transformational power. I'd like to leave you with one last idea, which is disruption and innovation is a process, not a product. I wish I could give you a final slide of here's the answer for how to handle all the disruption we're facing right now. But this framework is going to allow each of you to find that answer for your individual markets and organizations. I am very grateful to have been the opening keynote at this amazing first Congress of Arabic Publishing and Creative Industries, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions and learning from all the experts who will follow. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
And I've already have a couple of questions here ready for you.
I'm ready, yes.
All right, and the first question is, for this model, what is the application for developed and developing countries?
I am very happy this question came up because I think we might have missed a slide. Maybe I'll try and go back to it. Here, there's a QR code here if you want to scan it with your camera. This just goes to my LinkedIn page. On my LinkedIn page, I'll be publishing all of the academic articles that I have taken this structure from. And in those articles, there's one particularly amazing article published by Harvard Business Review that shows how this model actually shifts. The 70-20-10 breakdown is kind of a universal standard. But depending on developing nations or, for example, technology companies, that balance is very different. Their big bets are much higher than 10%. So, but for developing nations, the ratios can be a little bit different. So I think it's really important in that first challenge I issued when you go to your leadership teams to be talking about your tolerance for risk. How can you get an inversion of investments? Because your ratio might be slightly different from this, but the inverse pyramids are the important part to remember. So I think for developing countries, it's probably going to be less funneled like this and a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another question is, we hear all about having libraries, publications, and the metaverse and NFTs.
Yeah.
How can publications benefit from this innovative technology?
If I knew the full answer to that question,
Some of them.
I think it is incredible. This is a rapidly evolving space that I find very, very exciting. I think we don't yet know the answer to that question, and I think this is the most fun stage of innovation because it can become anything. Remember how revolutionary it was the day that the iPhone was announced? Do you remember that speech by Steve Jobs when he opened our minds to thinking that the entire world's information could now be in our pocket and universally accessible? We're having a similar moment with NFTs and digitization of not only entire libraries, but of digital content, of YouTube, of art, of technology. I think this is the next Gutenberg moment where we will go from thousands of offerings to millions very, very quickly. So I would
This is how you imagine it.
I do.
Yes. Another question is, wondering if Google or Amazon have to change their business processes when it came to managing the transformational team, and if there were any major risks we may face to doing so.
It is very risky. That's absolutely a right assessment, because these big bets take a long period of time, a heavy infusion of revenue and investment, and with unsure results. So that's why the 10% model works really well, because you're not risking your entire company, but you're hoping that that will then become your core basis. So it does feel risky, and if you implement this properly, your current managers are going to get very nervous. That's a sign of success, because this takes a completely different management style, because you need to be aiming for the long haul, and you can't use your usual metrics to measure the efficacy of these investments. As I mentioned, it's much more about asking these innovators what you're learning rather than trying to translate that too early into new offerings, new earnings. And so it's a completely different way of managing the talent, the KPIs, and measuring success. It's on a much longer scale. That's why we most often see it within government agencies and with research institutions within the universities, is because they have much more longer time frames to work to drive.
But there's a great
success.
evidence of the success of this model, right?
Oh, it is the reason that Amazon and Google exist today.
Exactly.
Were these big bets.
And for now, we have 2 minutes for the last question. Can we apply the golden ratio for innovation at non-profit organizations?
I do think so.
Okay.
I know we have to be very careful with our budgets. We have to be thoughtful with every investment that we have been given. But I think there's some incredible examples out there of nonprofit organizations taking seemingly big risks in how they're meeting the needs of their people. Not only how they're answering the needs of today, but I think in nonprofits, the most important part of the golden ratio isn't necessarily in where we're spending our funds, but in the mindset. Are we solving the problems that are under our feet today? Or are we anticipating the needs of those we're serving for what they're going to need tomorrow and preparing now to be able to serve them in that most effective way? I think for nonprofits especially, it is mostly in that mindset in anticipating the needs of those they're serving.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the great presentation and for answering all our inquiries and questions. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Huge round of applause for Anne, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and now, for our first panel, do you know what are top Arabic publishing markets? Our panelists will reveal the answer to this question and many others in our first panel discussion on the status of Arabic publishing. I kindly request our moderator, Carlo Carreno, and speakers Rudiger Wischenbert, Stephanie Lamprindi, Shireen Kraidiye, and Sharif Becker to join me on the stage. Sharif Becker, تفضلوا.
Everyone's getting ready? My name is Carlo Correjo. I'm a publishing consultant and I work in digital publishing. And I'm originally from Brazil and I live in Sweden. And I've been honored to be the moderator of this very dynamic panel, I believe. But first, I'd like to thank you, the Abu Dhabi Language Center and the organizers of this event. I think that could be a very important beginning of new congresses in the Arabic world. And I'm really happy to be here to learn, because I've always been curious about the Arabic book market, and I don't know much. So I'm happy to have my colleagues here who can teach me a little bit. So instead of me introducing them and spending precious minutes, I actually asked them to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what they do, and give their first statements of ideas to contribute to this panel, which is about to discuss the state of the Arabic book market today and in the future. So, just looking at my list here, I would like to start with sharing credit. So if you can introduce yourself and your company and make your first statement.
Thank you, Carlo. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm Shireen Kraidiye. I'm a children's book publisher. I'm a researcher, and I teach children's literature and social work in the university. So I'm in the field. To talk about publishing, we have to talk about the process of publishing and to talk about also the factors that influence publishing. So if we look at children's book publishing, for example, we start with the authors and illustrators and translators. And recently in the Arab world, there are more authors and translators of children's books. The next step is the publishing house itself. And also in the past 5 to 7 years, we've seen an increase of children's book publishers, especially in the Gulf, and to move into our market, which is our market, and our customers are not our consumers in the children's book industry. So our markets are mainly book fairs where we take the books and we sell them to our customers. It's NGOs and government organizations, it's schools and it's parents and it's distributors. So what is our market looking at? What do they want? And they usually want things that can help in developing reading, and they want books with topics that are really recent these years. And then we look at all the other things that influence publishing, which is the online media and what's happening and the economical situation. So I think we will go through this in details later, whatever you're interested to know. So I'll stop for now and give it to you.
Thank you, Shireen. And now, Sheriff Bakr.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm Sharif Bakr. I've been working in publishing for 25 years. I'm the owner and general manager of Al-Arabi Publishing and Distributing. I was the general secretary of the Egyptian Publishers Association. I'm a member of the FTP committee, Freedom to Publish Committee of the International Publishers Association. I'm a member of the Publishing and Book Committee of the Higher Supreme Council in Egypt, and many other hats, but mainly I like to be a publisher. Carlo said that we have limited time and we have to dazzle you with some numbers. So I dug some numbers from Google, which I hope they are correct. The numbers are, if you want, we want to give what's the potential of our market. I think Arabic market in publishing is one of the very growing and potential markets in the near future, not so far. We are 436 million Arab living, speaking Arabic, and we have another 20 million abroad, living in Sweden, for instance. As we know, Arabic is the second language there now. So we have a potential 20 more million. So overall, 457 million is quite a big number. It came to my knowledge very recently. There was a statistics that was published that according to the Independent, Egypt is number 5 on the most reading cultures now. We have 7.30 hours per week of reading, which is quite a number. I think it's the Independent at the end of the day. So it's supposed to be reliable, and that means that we're growing. In Egypt, 61% is under 30. So it's quite a young market, and that I think implies or applies also on the rest of the Arab world. So what we want to say is that we have a big potential. Maybe we're not there yet, but that means that there is a place to grow.
Thank you, Sheriff. And now it's Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Lamprinidi. I'm the Regional Content Manager at Storytel for our non-European markets, leading the content development in these markets and the content strategy. And previously, I worked within Storytel's expansion team, and again, leading the content development in Storytel's new markets. And my background is in publishing. I worked in the UK trade industry for many years at Hachette and Penguin Random House. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about Storytel for those who maybe are not so familiar. So Storytel is a global subscription service with over 2 million subscribers. Our vision is to make the world a more creative and empathetic place through great stories to be enjoyed with everyone, anywhere, and anytime. And through our acquisition this year of audiobooks.com, we also entered the world's largest audiobook market, the US. So through the Storytel Group, we own a number of print publishing houses in the Nordic markets. And together with them and our internal audiobook publisher Storyside, we publish more than 8,000 audiobooks a year in over 30 languages. We entered the MENA region in 2017, and then in 2020, we acquired the Arabic audiobook company Kitab Sauti, and today we offer the world's largest audiobook catalog in Arabic. And for a few stats that Carla wanted, I can share with you that, yes, we have over 2 million subscribers globally. We have a catalog of over 700,000 titles in the Storytel service in over 30 languages. And we see that 90% of the consumption in each of the local markets actually takes place in the local languages, which is why we invest so much in building the local catalogs and working with publishers locally. We also see that 70% of the consumption is actually on backlist titles, which shows the importance not only of improving discoverability of those titles, but also investing in producing the local bestsellers that are always widely consumed in the service.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now my friend Rüdiger.
My name is Rüdiger Wischenbart. I'm based in Vienna in Austria, working in trying to understand publishing markets for quite a while. And I connect directly with Anne Hyatt's keynote, a pronouncement that if you operate in a market for your company, you really need to know your numbers. For those 70% of your core business, you want to know how big is that market, what is the driving forces shaping these markets, etc. And in book publishing, I'm afraid, and you are very familiar with that situation, we have problems in having these numbers. Specifically in the Arab world, very, very little reliable book publishing market statistics exist, but that is also true for many parts of the global markets. And our ambition is to shed a little bit of light in that. For instance, for many years, we publish a global 50 ranking of the 50 globally leading publishing corporations worldwide. We try to understand what are they doing, who is buying whom, what are their markets, what is the transformation of these markets. Or a lot has been already said about digital, but what is digital? Digital is so many things. It's e-commerce. So selling physical books across the internet. It's also e-books. It's audiobooks. You can now subscribe to books. So all these things have a very strong digital component, and we try, again, with the numbers, to understand, to describe as models what is going on. For instance, during the past 2 years of the pandemic, because we have here a friend of Storytel, audiobooks, digital audiobooks, sold, consumed in subscriptions, we saw that something that originally was just a specialty of Sweden and a few markets in Northern Europe, has really increased and steadily increased and expanded in markets so diverse as Germany, Spain, or Brazil. That's the kind of research that we are doing. And with regard to the Arab environment, I think it's very important to understand the specifics, how different book markets and reading audiences are. Take the example of my country, Austria or Germany, and compare it to Egypt or to the Gulf area. It's really different markets. We started 10 years ago by doing the first market study together with my friend Nasser Jarous, who is with us here. 10 years ago, we did the first research about how big is the Emirati book market altogether. And so we interviewed people, distributors, publishers, etc. We did quite a bit of other research trying to understand readers. For instance, we did at one book fair a few years ago a survey, how are young people reading and what is reading for these young people? And it turned out, particularly for the young boys, for them, they said to us, it is hard work, while the girls found it more fun. So that's the kind of research that we do, and I hope that we can contribute a little bit as an outside observer to our discussion here.
Thank you, Rüdiger. So now, back to you, Sheriff. You show there is a huge potential. Now, and I come from a country that has huge potential, Brazil. We say it's the country of the future and that it's always going to be the country of the future and the future never arrives. So in the Arabic book market, what do you think are the challenges? What do you need to realize this potential? Is the lack of better stats and information one of the challenges? What are the other challenges that you think?
I mean, in the Arab world, we have a lot of challenges, apparently, mainly unlike Europe. Like maybe we don't have the numbers, maybe we don't have in Europe it's more saturated, the market. Here it's still potential. Like for instance, the last Cairo book fair, we had over 2 million visitors to the book fair, especially in the last 4 days when it was the holiday started for the school. And that affected very much the number of people coming. So there is the potential. There is a problem of distribution. So it's very hard for me to send books here in the Emirates or in Saudi or in Morocco. The logistics, there is censorship, of course, which is a big problem. And now it's increasing somehow more. But thanks to the digital that you can, with the Storytel, for instance, some books are forbidden, but you can still listen to them on Storytel or on other platforms or e-books. We have the money barrier, which is the price of the books. We can't really, you have some barriers that you can break, else you wouldn't be selling. Also, we have some, the habit of reading itself. Maybe it's not endorsed by many countries. Here in the Emirates, they are really doing that, and they are endorsing it, and it's increasing very much, which is very nice. And as we'll see in the book fair, you'll see how the people thriving on this. But in many other cultures and countries, for school, it's like a burden. As you said, it's like a heavy thing to read a book because, oh, I finished reading. It's not fun. It's not introduced as a fun thing for children. Yet there is now the trend of the young people that they read. They have, the book clubs are very popular, book signing events, talking to authors. So there is this balance that I think is breaking now, and we're getting into a bigger circle, hopefully. But we need really to fix the main things: distribution, piracy, censorship. These are three main problems that we always face. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Can you contribute a little bit from Lebanon and maybe from the context that you said about you think publishing about as a chain of several parts and not just publishers, and particularly on children's books and educational books that...
This in Arabic, or you want me to continue in English?
I prefer if you continue in English, because then the dynamics in the panel works a lot better.
Okay. So I don't think there's one answer to everything. I think in publishing, children's book or publishing in general, there's so many small and special stories for each and every publisher. And each and every publisher almost do it his own or her own way. So it depends on what kind of books you're working with, what are your markets, what are the relationships you have. You know, the Arab world works differently than the European market because Arabs have a lot of relationships that they build together, and a lot of the business is done through knowing the people. For example, if you want to work with a big distributor, for example, in Saudi Arabia, you have to build a relationship. You have to know the people you have, and then you can push your books, and then you do that. Because we do experiment. The 70, 20, 10, I don't think it's always the same because in the Arab market, because we do experiment a lot, because it's a very fresh market with so many different ideas. Because if we look at publishing before 2000, it used to be mainly translations of children's books. And then after 2000, there's starting to be like the movement where more authors and illustrators are being, they're trying, they're sending manuscripts. So this is where the change is happening. So it's changing all the time. And I don't think there's one answer to everything. We have to take one specific thing and then analyze it. For example, if you want to take educational publishing, even we have to take it for example, picture books or activity books and analyze how it's working this way. And it's totally different than picture books or young adult books. And it changes with markets. So if I'm selling in Muscat, it would be totally different than if I'm selling in Egypt, for example, where there's now a booms of mothers and influencers, and it's totally different than Saudi Arabia. And Lebanon is not a market now because with the crash, we're doing, actually, it's very bad. So everything is changing. Now with, if we're talking about Lebanon, for example, there's the NGO now, where we have to promote reading among children who've missed 2 years of school or among refugees all around the world. So now with the refugee crisis, things are also changing. So I think it's very fast. It's a lot of changes.
And you mentioned how hard it is to import and export books, but I was taking a look at your website, and you seem to be very successful sending books everywhere. We're just discussing even how to send books to Sweden now because of the Syrian population there. So it seems like you found a way, and you work through, you find a way to distribute internationally. Can you share a little bit how was this adventure, and how have you succeeded? And if you can say in Arabic, they asked us to speak Arabic, not me, but you. So.
So العربي دايما بالعربي العالم النشر دايما هيك عالم فيه تغيير، عالم في حماس، بدنا نضلنا نغير، بدنا نضلنا نفكر بافكار جديده، بدنا نضلنا نفكر شو عم بيصير بالعالم. اذا عم نبعث لدول العالم قديش رخيص اقدر ابعث على امريكا او على اوروبا او على استراليا، في كثير عرب باستراليا. فكل حتى بالعالم كل بلد او كل منطقه عندها خصوصياتها. يعني انا هلا بلشت جرب روح على اوروبا لانه بدي اقوي سوقنا باوروبا، لانه مثل ما شفنا لبنان تغير والاسواق عم تتغير. باوروبا كل بلد غير. بايطاليا العرب اللي بايطاليا بفكروا كثير غير عن العرب بالمانيا، لانه بالمانيا بنلاقي العرب مجموعين بشوارع معينه. بايطاليا لا، بيكونوا ناس ما عندهم شوارع، ما عندهم، يعني مفرقين اكثر. حتى لما نروح على بلجيكا كمان، بكل مكتبة ببلجيكا بكل حدا بوزع بيشتغل بطريقة تانية، بس إجمالاً الأشياء اللي بنلاقيها بتجمعهم كلهم هو التعليم. لأنه معظم الناس العرب اللي تركوا بلدهم وسافروا على أي دولة عالمية بهمهم يعلموا أولادهم عربي، بهمهم تكمل اللغة، فبيستعملوا الكتب اللي بدها تعلم. سلاسل المطالعة هلأ كتير عم تشتغل مع العرب، لأنه هي تمرين للقراءة، للولد يضلوا يقرأ، ونضلنا عم نقرأ الكتب العربية. والكتب الإسلامية كمان بتضلها كتير مهمة بعالمنا العربي ولأولادنا برات العالم العربي.
Go ahead, Sharif.
أضيف للشيرين قالته إن مثلا عندنا تجربة في مصر السنة اللي فاتت Amazon.com فتحت Amazon.eg في مصر، وده كان تحدي كبير للناشرين، لأن اكتشفوا مرة واحدة إن مفيش ميتا داتا عند الناشرين، مفيش بيانات للكتب، البيانات الكاملة. يعني الناشر كان بيبقى عنده إكسل شيت في اسم الكتاب، اسم المؤلف، السنة، السعر، اكتشف ان لازم في وزن وطول وعدد صفحات وسمك وتفاصيل كتيره وريفيوز وحاجات لازم يحطها علشان يبقى افيلبل. فبرضو picking up on what you said على ال 10% اللي لازم نستثمرها، يمكن كان في ميزه للدور اللي كانت مجهزه بياناتها. احنا كنا منها، احنا دار نشر عمره 47 سنه، كنا بنشتغل في حاجات كانت الناس بتشوفها ملهاش اي لازمه وتضييع وقت، وبنحضر ندوات ومؤتمرات غريبه، بس في الاخر كنا احنا مستعدين. وكنا مثلا اول فاتوره تعملها امازون كانت معانا، مش عارف دي حاجه كويسه ولا لا، بس يعني هنشوف. بس بما ان السوق ما فيهوش توزيع خالص، فاحنا نامل ان امازون تقدر تعمل ده. واحنا كدار نشر برضو كنت رغم ان احنا عمرنا 47 وانا بشتغل بقالي 25 سنه، بس كنت انا بحط في الببلشنج بلان بتاعتي في خطه النشر 10% ريسك. انا كنت بسميها ريسك، بس دلوقتي فهمنا انها ممكن يبقى اسمها مختلف. كنت بعمل كتب غريبه، بمعنى كتاب كبير قوي، موضوع ما اشتغلناش عليه قبل كده، فكره جديده، مثلا جانر ما عملناهوش، وده حقق يعني في 90% من المرات كان بيحقق نجاح كبير. يعني ساعات عملنا كتب مثلا كوميكس ما كناش بنعملها، عملنا كتاب عن تاريخ جري، دي حاجه ما حدش عملها في الوطن العربي، فكان في حاجات فيها الريسك فعلا بتنفع، بس لازم يبقى الواحد هناك قبلها، مش يستنى لما تجيله ويبتدي يتحرك.
Thank you, Sharif. I'd like to move a little bit to digital now. And Stephanie, I think you could share, I think it would be interesting to share a little bit how Storytel got into Arabic. We are both live in Sweden. I'm Brazilian, we're Greek, so we're part of the immigrant context there. And, well, I will tell the story, but there was an Arabic platform created in Sweden before that started to acquire. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yes, so that's correct. Kitab Sauti was founded by Sebastian Bond, who hopefully is here with us today, and was originally a Swedish company, acquired then again by another Swedish company. And I would say the big appeal, as previously mentioned, 400 million Arabic speakers worldwide, rich literary history, and of course there is a synergy there with Arabic being the second most widely spoken language in Sweden as well. So we do, for example, make our Arabic catalog available to our subscribers in Sweden as well, just specifically for this reason.
Can we ask you how well are you doing with this? Is it what you expected or it's a shock? We want numbers, huh?
So I can't share the numbers, I'm sorry. So I can say that, yeah, of course there are challenges, and generally in markets where audiobooks have not been previously available, and when we first, both us and Kitab Sauti, when we first started working in the MENA region, there were virtually no audiobooks, just mainly from children's publishers. They would have the CD version of the book alongside the audiobook. So there was a lot of work that we had to do in even just building a viable catalog for subscribers. So the first thing that we always have to do in markets like this is of course, working really closely with the local publishers to identify and build that local catalog, hopefully together. But then it's an education of the public about audiobooks frequently, and I think this was true a lot more before the pandemic, that people didn't know what audiobooks were, and we work to show how audiobooks can be easily incorporated into your life when you're stuck in traffic, or I hear there's a lot of traffic in Egypt, so when you're stuck in traffic, or for example, cooking, or for your kids when you don't want them to be spending so much time looking at a screen, but perhaps they are not taking to physical reading, and this is another way to introduce them to these great stories. So yes, so the first challenge is education of what audiobooks are, how can they fit into your life. And then the second challenge that we face is, as was mentioned previously as well, to do with piracy. So the people who do know what audiobooks are and there are quite a few now, often will seek them out through pirated means, which provides a really terrible experience of listening to these stories, and it doesn't really truly represent the way that an audiobook can really bring a story to life. So, as with the music industry before us and with what Spotify did, we want to show that a great user app experience and having all these stories on your fingertips and with incredible production value is worth the price of admission, shall we say. So these are the challenges that we have faced.
And Stephanie, without getting into numbers, can you share some specifics of the Arabic enterprise of Storytel compared to other markets, like genre-wise? Is it in Sweden? It's audiobooks are basically fiction only, and how are genres in the Arabic world? The challenge of getting content here is easier, harder. Can you comment a little bit on a comparative perspective?
Yes, so the biggest genre is for Storytel overall, and especially in the Nordic markets, the biggest genres are crime and thrillers and feel-good and romance. So it's very much escapism, sometimes escapism through violent crime, I guess. But what we see in our trends here in the region is more towards nonfiction and personal development. However, that is something I would say that's quite common in markets that are newer to audiobooks. We tend to see early adopters start listening. That's their entryway towards audiobooks. But as the market matures, we tend to always see a shift in fiction. And now again, also with the pandemic, but overall, we are starting to see more of a demand towards children's audiobooks as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, Rutger, you pointed out some challenges for numbers, for getting stats. But during your whole life that I've been following as a friend, as a professional colleague, you've been an expert in getting good reports with very limited data. I mean, we've done things like Brazil, my friend. What can be harder than that? So what's the solution? What's the way to go? You pointed the problems, but do you have suggestions or advice?
Okay, if you invite me, I provoke you by saying the question that you asked is very easy to answer. Which country is more difficult in assessing than Brazil? Or is it? The entire Arab world is much more difficult for several reasons. Number one, it is so fragmented. Sharif mentioned bringing books from one Arabic country to another is a huge challenge. For many, many reasons, practical reasons, legal reasons, etc. Number two, you also mentioned there is no catalog of titles available. Yeah? Really, it's not a joke, but 10 years ago, I was having a good conversation with the organizer of one of the major Arabic book fairs, and I asked, well, why don't you release a list with the names of all your exhibitors, like a who is who, a yellow pages of the Arabic publishing? And they said, oh, I have this data. He opened his drawer in the office and said, I have a CD-ROM here. I have that information, but he couldn't understand why he should make it public and share it. And I think that spirit of sharing is missing very, very strongly. But now we can be very philosophical about sharing and say, oh, it's so important, or, oh, we should do it. We should start tomorrow, or not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or we are practical. And if you want to be practical, you need structures. The same applies for distribution. We can wish, since I'm traveling the Middle East about publishing, people say distribution is a problem. But what are the fixes? I guess we are here at a book fair, at a conference of professionals who are sitting in the audience. What is really very important is to create a few structures that are not just tied to festivals, once every year in this place and once every year in the other place, but some kind of substantial permanent structures. For instance, having someone like Amazon here is a benefit for two reasons. And you can be for Amazon or against, but it has one clear benefit. It's an encouragement for every publisher to build a list with metadata. And these metadata can be used for Amazon, but you can also use it for Nilua Furat. So you suddenly have much better access to major, also domestic platforms of distribution. So you can make achievements. But for these metadata, you can do it in many different ways. Amazon has the advantage that they are pretty much a standard, but there are also other standards. So you need to engage with standards. That's a very boring thing, but it pays off, because instead of calling from Cairo, a publisher in Beirut, every time, do you have already released that new title that I want to sell? With standards, it's at your fingertips. Yeah? So for that, you need structures. And when I prepared with Carlo our conversation here, I thought, where can we find structures in comparable markets, comparable to Arabic fragmentation? And obviously, we will not find these models in Western Europe or in China or in the US, but suddenly I thought of Latin America, because Latin America also is a big readership of the same size, but distributed among many countries. And these countries are also very fragmented. Carlo knows better than I, but they recognize the other ones by their accent. They know that in Chile, they speak certain words differently from Spain or from Mexico. So culturally, there are differences, but also in terms of legal, etc. And they had also the big challenge, and that is another very, very important new word here in our conversation. They have challenges in finding readers. It's not obvious that kids love to read. Yeah? So reading education is something. And the third thing is authors. Respect for copyright protection. Sheikha Bodour mentioned that during the COVID-19 crisis, piracy surged. So we have three things: fragmentation of information and distribution, reading education, and respect of the author and their intellectual property. And they created, a few decades ago, for Latin America, a transnational organization, which they called CERLAIC, which is a Center for Education of Reading and Book Production, based in Bogota. It's an arrangement between governments, and they do exactly this year after year, 12 months every year. Organizing reports, bringing the people together, having a board of advisors from the various countries. You don't need to start with that for the entire Arab world. Take a few of the core countries that we have mentioned here already, like Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, I don't know, and start such a process of an ongoing, permanent platform that caters to these three top areas of concern. That's how you could build something to overcome these fragmentations. Yeah? Work together, create a permanent structure of creating these standards, etc., include the very important topic of reading education so that school teachers or government policymakers can address that organization, say, how do we fix that law? And then the respect of the author and the copyright. I think that would be really a fast-forward time engine for you to overcome step by step, continuously, the problems, the shifts, the rifts that you have been confronting for the past 10 years.
Thank you, Edgar. I'll jump into the questions from the audience here. We have several, so let's try to keep it short. One is about distribution. You have mentioned distribution is an issue. I think it was you, Sheriff. Is this issue driven by financial reasons or infrastructure, considering the location of countries or availability of distributors? What's the real problem in distribution?
Arabic or English?
Arabic.
Arabic, okay. Maybe ممكن مشكلة التوزيع في الوطن العربي نظريا احنا كلنا بينا حدود واحدة، مكان واحد، مفيش صعاب، مفيش جبال، مفيش بحار قوي، المفروض التوصيل سهل، بس عمليا الكوميونيكيشن او التواصل مش موجود. عشان نجيب كتبنا هنا مثلا في المعرض احنا بنشحن قبلها بشهرين، وبتيجي على العربيات وبتعدي على 3-4 دول، ولازم بتعدي على رقابة في دولة أو تقف في حتة. الشحن مكلف جدا رغم ان هو نظريا مش مكلف، بس ساعات تلاقي ان تجيب كتاب من انجلترا ارخص من انك تجيبه من لبنان دايركت، لازم بيلف لفة. ف يعني اللوجيستكس بتاعت الموضوع هي اللي صعبة. متهيألي لو في يعني شركات اشتغلت على الموضوع ده هيوفر كتير وهيحقق، بس دايما بتقف بكده. ودي ممكن مشكله امازون اللي في مصر حاليا، ان هي وده لو يعني زي ما هو قال ممكن تبقى عيب او ميزه، بس انا شايف ان هي جايه تمهد الطريق او تعبد الطريق شويه، لان في وقت ما فيش اي حاجه خالص لو حد جه واشتغل شويه ممكن يساعد اللوكال بقى بلاتفورمز اللي شغاله. يمكن ملحوظه ان الشركتين، الشركه الكبيره اللي ماسكه الكتاب الصوتي شركه سويديه ما بتعرفش عربي، جايه في الوطن العربي تشتغل، واشترت شركه سويديه تانية برضو ما بتعرفش عربي كانوا شغالين هنا، ودي حاجه غريبه. تاني حاجه ان في لوكال بلاتفورمز كتيره زي امازون حاولوا يشتغلوا، وبعضهم نجح زي النيل والفرات او كده، بس اللي برضو جاي يشتغل جاي من بره بالقواعد اللي من بره، فيمكن في حته هنا واقعه بين الاثنين. شوفي
موضوع من منظور تاني. دايما نحن لما نقول مشاكل التوزيع بالعالم العربي بنقول شحنا وما وصلوا وهيك. دايما نحن بناخذ الموديل او المثل تبعنا هو تطور النشر او كيف عمليه النشر والتوزيع بالعالم الغربي. هل يا ترى التوزيع بهيدي الطريقه هو الحل للعالم العربي؟ ليه ما سالنا حالنا السؤال بطريقه ثانيه؟ هل يا ترى لانه نحن مبيعاتنا مش كبيره هالقد بطريقه معينه بنبيع بطريقه ثانيه؟ مشان هيك ما وصلنا للتوزيع كموزعين كديستريبيوترز هول سيلرز مثل بانجلترا او باوروبا؟ ليه ما بنفكر فيها بطريقه ثانيه؟ ليه مش نحن طريقتنا ان نحن لانه كعرب بنحب نتواصل مع بعض؟ هو معرض الكتاب هو شيء كثير مهم لنا، لانه نحن نقابل الموزعين، المكتبات، الاهل، نتعاطى معهم لنقدر نبيع عند كتاب. ليه ما بعرف اذا نحن حنصير مثل الغرب، وبحس صعب انه نصير نحن، او دائما نطلع انه لازم يكون عندنا ديستريبيوتر مثل هون وهون. حتى مثل ما انت قلت الامازون الخبره تبعيتهم مش هي ذاتها اللي حتكون. ومين قال انه الامازون انه اللي بده يقرا بده يشتري من امازون مصر حيطلع بنفس الطريقه للبريفيوز واللي انت قلته بقلب عن الكتب مثل ما طلع عليها الناشر اللي بده يشتري باوروبا بامريكا؟ ليه دائما بدنا نطبق الموديل اللي هو اجنبي على عالمنا بالنشر؟ هيدا اللي عملته برساله الدكتوراه، فبحس دائما بيطبق.
Rutger, keep it quick.
I would very strongly encourage your approach. Invent your own models that are yours, that are fitting to your requirements, your preferences. That's it, yeah. I mean, you can take inspiration from other places, but redo it.
I'll just say one word. برضو تعليقا على اللي بيتقال، القرصنه ما ابتدتش زمان وانا صغير، كان معرض الكتاب الناس بتسرق الكتب فيزيكلي، يعني بياخد الكتاب وبيجيب بالطو ويحطه في جيبه ويسرقه لو مش قادر يشتريه. دلوقتي لما سوق النشر كبر وبقى بروفيتبل، يعني بقى فيه ربح، بقى ظهر الناشرين اللي عندنا، او يعني المطابع اللي بتطبع كتب مزوره، ده غير القرصنه الالكترونيه. فطول ما السوق بقى فيه فلوس ظهرت القرصنه، لما يبقى فيه فلوس كفايه هتظهر شركات التوزيع، لان اي شركه توزيع دلوقتي بتحسبها مش هتكسب. امازون هو بيبص للصوره الكبيره للموبايلات والبرفيومز والكتب بالمره، فهي دايما مش في الاولويه.
So moving a little to the demand side of this, we talk about a lot about the supply. There are two questions here that I'm going to make in one. So what are the best practice to energize the demand side to food industry? I'm talking about readership here, how to energize readership and consumption. But then there's a very interesting question. He's asking, what's contributing to the lack of Arabic content creation? Is it the low demand from the audience, or did the lack of publishing create the lack of demand? So who comes first, the egg or the chicken?
ما اعتقدش ان في المحتوى العربي قليل بالمعنى، هو ممكن ديجيتالايزنج المحتوى العربي قليل، بس احنا يعني وطن عربي كبير وعندنا قراء كتير. ده احنا عندنا في مصر على الاقل بنتريق او يعني بنضحك كتير ونقول ان بقى الكتاب اكتر من القراء، يعني بقى ودلوقتي بقت دور النشر كمان اكتر من القراء. فاحنا عندنا ظاهره مش عارف صحيه ولا لا، بس هي هتتم فلترتها اوتوماتيكلي يعني مع الوقت. بس احنا عندنا كتاب كتير، وعندنا دلوقتي دور نشر كتيره بتفتح علشان تنشر للكتاب ده. فاحنا متهيألي المحتوى العربي موجود، وزي الدليل اللي قلته ان كان في معرض القاهره اكتر من 2 مليون زائر. فدول، واحنا المعرض السنه دي كان ديجيتال، فكان كل اللي بيخش بكيو ار كود، كان بيبرلس، يعني المعرض كان من غير ورق، فكنا عارفين العدد اللي بيخش يوميا وده عدد كبير. فانا شايف ان لا، في محتوى عربي متهيألي. ولا برضو شيرين تقولي رايك يعني؟
Do you want to comment?
No, I just agree, because the word lack is something that it's very scary, and we usually don't really go that much, because I think the market is getting bigger. We're having much more content in the Arab world.
Okay, I'll try to mix 3 questions in one now to save time. So let's go to digital. So there is one question asking about audiobooks and children's book, if there is a future on it, but wait. And also another question asking the state of digitalization in Arabic books. Maybe, Sheriff, you can comment. And then to you, Shirin, do you think paper books will maintain its ranking as the first option? So maybe you can mix that with the audiobooks and digital books for children, and you can comment on the overall state.
I'll start with that.
You can start.
There's now, I think it's very similar to what happened in the UK. When the e-books started, people thought that, okay, we will sell less paper book. But I think the e-book market is parallel to the paper books. And with children, paper books will stay there. Lebanon is a different example, with very few electricity hours and Wi-Fi problems. So I think it will take us a lot of time to get over paper. So you cannot say that this is the case everywhere. And I think in Egypt, in areas where people can't really afford tablets, you will not expect paper books to go less. And parents still want their children to go out of the screens, so paper books will stay there. As for audiobooks, I don't know how culturally we are used to using audiobooks. But again, I would like to say it will be different in each and every market and each and every age group or category of books. And with your experiences now, you will tell us what will happen.
Yes, I think I agree that, of course, physical books, the experience of reading to your child from a book together, that would never be entirely replaced with a digital format. I think audiobooks can be a way to introduce reading to reluctant readers, perhaps. As I said, to spend less time away from screens, and I guess, of course, you can do that with a physical book as well. Audiobook provides a different experience, so in a way, it's, often there is sounds, there could be a soundscape, there could be music, there could be multiple narrators. So in a way, it can be an enhanced experience of the same story and a different way for a child to be introduced to that. And a way to introduce reluctant readers to enjoying these stories so that they could perhaps then enjoy it in the physical format as well. So I think they go hand in hand specifically when it comes to children's content.
And you have a question here that's more for you, Stephanie. On audiobooks, what's the state of the subscription, the market in the Arabic world, generally speaking? But then what's the subscription here? How does it compare in the Arabic world with Sweden? So they're asking to compare the Swedish market with the Arabic market. It's a little bit unfair. But.
Yes, it is quite different at this time. At this moment in Sweden, 50% of the book market is digital, and I would say the vast majority of that is audio. So Sweden has sort of led the audiobook revolution. So it's a little bit unfair to compare. And also Storytel was founded in Sweden in 2005, so it's quite an old company, and there's a lot of history there and a lot of competition with other services as well. So we're not quite there yet in the Arab world, but we are seeing good growth. And as I said, we're facing some challenges, which we're working hard to introduce the value of an audiobook to consumers, and of course provide the best possible production and working with really talented voice actors to bring the stories to life. And again, it's something that we believe try to keep authentic to the author's vision, casting voice actors from, if we have an Egyptian author, we'll cast an Egyptian voice talent. So we're authentic to the story, but we bring it to life in a compelling way with high production values, again, to show really the value that an audiobook can bring as a meaningful recreation for someone's life.
Go ahead.
I would like to comment on the digital side of it. I'm known to be a very optimistic person when it comes to this, because I see if you're too pessimistic, I wouldn't be able to go to work every day. So as we said, because of piracy, there's a lot of piracy in terms of PDFs on the internet. So this established a digital reader. So people read digitally and they accept to read from a screen. So there wasn't any possibility to transform them into reading into an app or a paid subscription app. Until recently also, we have to mention there is a Jordanian company called Abjad that started a reader. Apparently it's very good for readers. Many people who like physical books started they had to go for it for some reason. They are stuck in a place or want to travel and want to have the books. And they started, and because it's good, apparently they spend some time on the user experience and the interface and the content. They try to get the latest. So now, with the price of one book, you get a subscription of 1 month, and I'm seeing it growing very well in terms of revenues and in terms of readership. So maybe, as you were saying also, Shireen, there wasn't the thing there. Maybe when we have the thing now, people start to move to it. So if you invent the right application, if you have the right platform, it works. Like for Storytel in Arabic, I know that the number one place that people listen to is in the kitchen. Really, apparently the second is the gym, the third is in the car. So maybe we have a different mentality or culture that we have to respect also. And this is also, I say, there should also be like this emerge, some local experience with some international experience. That's how you build things now, I think.
Thank you. Again, 2 questions, one about piracy and IP. So one is piracy specific to some markets more than others? And how do markets manage to control it? And then the second question is, what's the issue with IP? And do we have the legal framework, or is it about enforcement? So basically, how can you fight piracy?
Well, as a member
maybe you can go in Arabic.
كعضو في اتحاد الناشرين المصري ولجنة الملكية الفكرية في اتحاد الناشرين الدولي، اتحاد الناشرين العرب واتحاد الناشرين المصري، كنا بنحاول دايما نحارب القرصنة بكذا طريقة. أولا في قوانين، بس قوانين كانت قديمة، فبنحاول نفعل القوانين القديمة. تاني حاجة في قانونين معروضين على مجلس الشعب بقى لهم أكتر من 5 سنين بنحاول نزقهم أو يعني ندخلهم مجلس الشعب في مصر. واحد لتغليظ العقوبة في القرصنة، وواحد لتغيير الشكل من هو الناشر في الوطن العربي أو في مصر بالذات. اتحاد الناشرين العرب بيحاول الناشرين المقرصنين بيمنعوا من المعارض العربية دلوقتي بشكل عام كلها ما فيهاش كتاب مقرصن إلى حد كبير، بينجحوا في النقطة دي. الناشر اللي بيبقى معروف عنه القرصنة بيبقى بلاك ليستد، بيتحط في لائحة ممنوع يخش المعارض. بس في مطابع بتطبع وبتوزع، ويمكن هم عندهم شبكة توزيع أنجح منا، لأن هو طبعا ما بياخدش أي تكلفة، هو بيطبع الكتب الناجحة بيوزعها وبياخد فلوسه كاش زي ما بنقول، فده أنجح طريقة توزيع. بس اللي بنحاول نعمله دلوقتي في مصر برضو بالتعاون مع الحكومة ان احنا نإديوكيت او نعلم القضاء ازاي يتعرفوا على الكتب، ان اتحاد الناشرين يبقى جزء من عملية الضبطية او ان هو يتعرف على الكتب المقرصنة، ان نغلظ العقوبة. ويمكن لو عرفنا نشتغل على الثلاثة دول كده، فهو مينلي دلوقتي تفعيل القانون اكتر منه القانون نفسه اللي بنطوره. فلو الاثنين دول اتحققوا متهيألي هتقل القرصنة لحد كبير مع وجود بدائل، وده حاجة مهمة زي الاكزامبل اللي أنا قلته، إن طول ما في بديل مقبول، لأن برضو ساعات الناشرين بيبقى اوفر برايسد، الكتب غالية جدا، فأنت بتبقي يعني برضو مش متعاطفة بس فاهمة وجهة نظر إن حد عايز مثلا يقرأ كتب كتير بس معهوش، فلو هو دفع سبسكريبشن زي ما بنقول ممكن ده يبقى حل مرضي إلى حد كبير للطرفين.
صح، بس دايما أنا بحب فوت بفكرة جديدة كمان. ليه ما يكون كمان نشتغل على الوعي تبع الناس انه ما يشتروا كتاب المقرصن؟ بدها وقت كتير، بس هذا بيكون بالتربيه بالمدارس، انه نحن بدنا نحترم حقوق المؤلف ونبلش من الشخص اللي
انت عارفه ان في الاول كان دايما الناس بتشكر المقرصن، دلوقتي بقى في سوشيال شيمينج شويه، ان ايه ده انت بتقرا كتاب بس ده على فكره مقرصن. فابتدى شويه الوعي ده يظهر في الوطن العربي لما الكتاب هم اللي قالوا كده. من الناس ما بتسمعش للناشرين، لكن الكاتب اقرب للقارئ، فلما هو قال له وعرف الموضوع فعلا نجح.
يعني يمكن لازم يكون عندنا حملات لنوعي الناس انه ما نشتري مقرصن، بده يكون عندنا مكتبات عامه انها نسمح للكتب تكون موجوده، بده يكون عندنا مكتبات بالمدارس، لبعدين بده يكون الكتاب موجود بين ايدين الكل، يكون عندنا المكتبات اللي على الطريق اللي خذ الكتاب اللي بدك اياه، واذا ما بدك ترجعه ما ترجعه، اذا بدك بدل. فلما يكون الكتاب موجود اكثر وفي وعي اكثر ان شاء الله يمكن كمان فينا نوصل اسرع، لانه اللي عم بقرصن هو عم بيكون كثير اذكى واسرع منا. اذا سكرت له اول ويب سايت بيفتح ثاني ويب سايت، اذا عملت له شيء بيرجع بيعيدها. يمكن واحده طريقه ثانيه هاي.
Rudiger?
Just one sentence. This is very consistent with all the international experiences of piracy. The most important thing, a good legal framework, of course, is the starting point. But then you make books available across various formats. And then you will still keep a certain amount of pirates. But these pirates wouldn't buy your books anyway. So focus on that part that you can win, and that is make a good availability, a good framework, and then you reduce the piracy to a level. So I can really underline that your two approaches are consistent with any international experience that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. The more we talk here, more I feel like I'm in Latin America discussing the exactly same issues. We have two questions about mergers. So would mergers be a good thing for the Arabic world? Would it be a solution to avoid so much fragmentation? That's a question maybe for you, Sheriff. But Rudiger, are mergers a solution for the global publishing? Is it good, mergers between companies? I mean, this is a trend, I think.
When we speak about mergers, we speak about many different things. Let me emphasize two of these. One kind of mergers is vertical integration. Vertical integration meaning one company owning a publishing company, a chain of bookstores plus distribution. That can be very beneficial because it makes a complete ecosystem more efficient, and a company that has learned to organize properly that ecosystem for themselves will find it more easy to collaborate with others who have done the same thing in professional ways. So having a certain degree of vertical integration, yes, makes sense. For the creation of high-level quality content, I think that's not necessarily the big solution. Small boutiques can very often do it better, particularly in markets like here, because it works better that way. It's artisanal, it's more consistent with your tradition of doing production. The second model of consolidation or mergers is one publishing company buying the other publishing company. I don't see any primary benefit from this. It might be reasonable to consider arrangements between Arabic and international partners. Like, this is a very delicate and not always successful thing. Hachette, the big French publishing group, for some time has engaged with non-European publishing entities in Lebanon, for instance. In China it failed. They had a very hard time, not very much came out of it. I think in Lebanon, to the extent of what I know, this is quite a substantial, significant, and a mutually helpful collaboration. Also, a last example, you have, it's not exactly a merger or a collaboration, but you have Sadiq in Great Britain. Saki, I'm sorry. I think that is very beneficial in having a foothold in one of the capitals out of the Arab world. So that kind of collaborative models might be more interesting than just one company buying the other one.
In the Arab world, more of a family company.
Exactly.
That's why it's very difficult. It's all family company, family-based, family legend and legacy. So just to give it away or merge, that's very difficult.
Again, that's the Arabic word, not Latin America, right? Okay, just check.
In the case of collaborations, like Hachette in Lebanon, that's exactly suitable for local family companies. Right?
In the Arab world, there's like
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
بالعالم العربي عندنا هالعلاقات الحلوه، يعني الناشرين بيعملوا الكولابوريشن بيناتهم، مش ضروري تكون بالاسم، بس دائما في العلاقات في دور نشر بيشتغلوا مع بعض، فهيدا الشيء دائما بوزيتيف. بدي ارجع اعلق على شيء ثاني على التشين، انه دار النشر يكون عنده مكتب وتوزيع، المشكله فيها هيدا الموديل موجود عندنا بالعالم العربي، والمشكله لما يصير هيدا بيصير بالمكتبه تبعيته بتوزيعه بيكون حصرا لكتبه، معظم المكتبات اصلا بالعالم العربي عم بتكون بيملكها حدا ناشر، فهيدا كمان ما بيعطي فرص للناشرين الباقيين ليقدروا يوزعوا كتبهم.
Thank you. Well, we still have lots of fantastic questions here. It's amazing the number of questions. So I encourage you guys who did these questions to look for the panelists during coffee break and just ask them straight. So thank you, Rutger. Thank you, Shireen. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Sheriff. And thank you for the organizers and for the Abu Dhabi Arabic Language Center for this opportunity. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Thank you so much for our panelists. That was definitely a great discussion, an eye-opener for us also to find different solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, our second panel discussion for the day is all about education and publishing in the virtual world, focusing on the digital learning platforms that became a part of our daily lives following the pandemic. I'd like to call on the stage Dr. Hanada Taha, our moderator, and speakers Cristobal Cobo, Al Kingsley, Bisan Qurban, and John Russell. Please join us on the stage. I would also like to request Dr. Hanad to speak in Arabic on this panel. That would be great. Thank you so much. تشيك انه العرب يحكوا بالعربي والأجانب يحكوا بالأجنبي لو سمحتوا، والترجمة حتكون ممتازة، فإذا good luck and enjoy your panel. Thank you.
Where, sorry?
Yeah, we didn't get this one.
مايك
معكم. شكرا. Alright. هناك. There. الكراسي. صباح الخير مرة ثانية. شكرا لكم جميعا على هذا الحضور الجميل. شكرا على هذا المؤتمر الرائع الذي يعد بأفكار جميلة جديدة مختلفة تتركنا أو نترك نحن هذا المؤتمر في نهايته ونحن نفكر بأفكار جديدة. لربما نفكر بتجارات جديدة ستبدأ، ولكن أهم من كل شيء لربما أن نفكر أكثر بمسائل التعليم، بمسائل ما الحاصل بين كل هذا التطور التكنولوجي الهائل، بين عوالم النشر، وهي صارت عوالم لأنها ليست عالماً واحداً الآن، على اختلافها وعلى كل الجديد الذي يحصل، وبين التعليم وماذا يحصل مع أبنائنا. قبل أن نبدأ مع الضيوف الكرام ذوي الخبرة الواسعة، أريد أن أقول بأننا حباً باللغة العربية واحتراماً لمركز أبوظبي للغة العربية الذي ينظم هذا المؤتمر اليوم، وثقة كبيرة بالمترجمين المحترفين الموجودين معنا في هذه القاعة، سأتكلم بالعربية، ونطلب من كل ناطق بالعربية أن يتكلم بالعربية اليوم، ونثق بأن المترجمين سينقلون الرسالة بشكلها العميق والمقصود للجميع. ولكني سأسأل الأسئلة باللغة الإنجليزية للناطقين بغير العربية. نبدأ بتعريف بسيط. سأطلب من الجميع لطفاً أن يعرفنا بنفسه وبنفسها بدقيقة، ولربما من أصعب الأمور في العالم أن نقول لك اختزل نفسك بدقيقة واحدة. فسنبدأ مع آل. تفضل.
Thank you. Yes, hi, I'm Al Kingsley. I like to refer to myself as a man of two hats. So one half, the last 30 years, I've been CEO of edtech company NetSport. We specialize in technology to help facilitate teaching and learning, and our products are available around the world. My other hat, the other half of my life, is I am chair of a multi-academy trust, a group of schools in the United Kingdom, where we've been expanding through growth of new schools, building new projects, I chair an alternative provision academy, which is looking and supporting young people that struggle in mainstream education. And I also chair our SEND board, so again, supporting young people who have special educational needs and disabilities. So between the two, I get to see the challenges and the opportunities in education, and sometimes try and create the solutions that go with that.
جميل جدا هذا الخلط بين عالمين، سنتكلم عن ذلك بالتفصيل إن شاء الله. أستاذة بيسان قربان، تفضلي.
شكرا. معكم بيسان إربان، أوريجينلي من لبنان، بسكن بدبي وبشتغل بدبي، ل3 أطفال بجننوا، وهيد أوف برودكت أند سيرفيسز ببيرسون إديوكيشن. شغفي بالحياة هو له علاقة بالتربية، له علاقة بالإديوكيشن. أوريجينلي بالأول كنت أشتغل كإنستراكشنال ديزاينر، بيسكلي كل الديجيتال ترانسفورميشن، كل الكونتنت اللي محطوط بحي الله لغة بأي طريقة، كيف فينا نحن نحطه بديجيتال فورمز تنوصل لعدد أكبر. بعدين انتقلت للببلشينج، وهلا عم بشتغل بالهاير اديوكيشن برودكت اند سيرفيسز للماركت تبعنا بالميدل ايست.
شكرا، اهلا وسهلا. جون راسل، تفضل.
Morning. Thank you so much. So my name is John Russell. I presently represent Alif Education, an organization dedicated to improving education here in the UAE. Actually, my background is in educational publishing. I began life as a teacher over 2 decades ago, and since then I've had the pleasure to work for organizations such as Oxford University Press, Springer Nature, Times Publishing Group, and I've just moved to Abu Dhabi, arrived a few months ago, and happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
أهلا وسهلا. Cristobal Cobo, تفضل.
Thank you very much. Cristobal Cobo, I'm Senior Education Technology Specialist at the World Bank. And within the bank, I have 2 hats as well. One has to do with conducting research to understand trends and provide technical guidance. And the other hat has to do on providing technical assistance to countries. So I work in different regions of the world, helping countries to improve the quality of the learning education, particularly now in the context of COVID. Thank you for having me.
جميل جدا، شكرا شكرا. نبدأ لربما بالسؤال الأول مع آل كينغزلي. So I'll shift to English now and ask you the question. In one of your blogs, Al, you mentioned that 30 to 40% of young people, and I maybe dare add and say even young adults and adults, have experienced negative impacts on their mental or social emotional health during the pandemic. And we know that probably these numbers could be even higher. How do you see this issue of social emotional well-being from your EdTech point of view, that hat you wear? And what are the challenges, but what are the solutions most importantly, in your opinion?
Thank you. I think it's a huge question, and I think probably whenever you come up and you look at the research for the evidence, you probably can add to that now in terms of the scale and potential for impact. I think we can take a very starter for 10 simplistic view, which is if we think about the things that resonate with us when we leave the education system, the things that we remember, the positive experiences, they're often the experiences that involve the interaction, the collaboration, the experiences, the events, the places we go, the school performances, and all the other activities that happen. And during a period of the pandemic, particularly, what we amplified was that separation and isolation for a lot of young people. And for many children that I would put in the category of requiring that special educational needs, for many of them, the structure and routine of seeing a familiar face, that person that was there to support and nurture, was also really pressured and challenged. And one of the biggest strengths we see in terms of pupil development in the classroom is that peer interaction and that pupil development. So there was a huge challenge that came about, and one of the things that, of course, we tried to do with all sorts of technology solutions was to try and mitigate that digital divide by providing tools that allowed for both synchronous, that real-time teaching and learning, and also asynchronous, that offline learning, and part of that then fed into new technologies that would support personalized learning pathways as well. And so we looked at those different challenges. What we tried to do is then see that actually there's a role where technology now is moving, and some will mention about the AI movement and how we can look at both augmented reality, virtual reality, and beyond as ways that we can deliver experiences as well that will be that spark for learning. lots of what I hear today is very much about, well, where's the catalyst? Actually, the catalyst is to have young people spark their love of learning, the passion for reading. And when in many schools, and I've been spending a lot of time between here, the US, the UK, talking about a term that I'm not particularly positive about, the catch-up term. It's a negative term to express with our learners. Actually, the starter for 10, if you want a child to be successful learning, is to put them in the right mindset, to be back familiar, confident in their strength and well-being. There are great solutions now that can help facilitate and nurture for SEMH. There are great tools that can be used as a self-reflective toolkit, both for staff and students, so that they can look for well-being opportunities, opportunities to reflect and develop themselves. And the biggest word that resonates with me whenever we're talking about how we're going to move a positive experience on, whether it's staff or students after the last 2 years, is confidence. Teaching staff are developing confidence in how to integrate technology, not because they should, but in ways that is effective and has impact in their teaching and learning. And our learners, just because they're digital natives, doesn't mean they know how to use the tools we want to use effectively for teaching and learning, are developing confidence in how to use that technology. And actually, to balance it, that includes the parents for our younger learners to make sure they've got the right support and nurture. So all of those come together, and I think that's where we're seeing technology being that facilitator and enabler as part of the process.
شكراً جزيلاً. هذا كلام جداً حقيقي، أن المهم في مسألة استخدام التكنولوجيا هو الاستخدام الفعال، هو أن نستخدمها لأنها تحل لربما مشكلة أو تساعدنا كي نتعلم أفضل أو هكذا، وليس لمجرد أن نأتي ونقول أننا نستخدم التكنولوجيا. أنا ما زلت في الورق، فأنت تعرف إلى أي عالم أنت به. شكراً. أنتقل إلى أستاذة بيسان. بيسان، طبعاً في عالم التعليم العالي، الجامعات، القطاع الجامعي عموماً، بمجيء تلك الجائحة التي فعلاً اجتاحتنا فجأة دون أن نتوقع، جبر هذا القطاع أن ينتقل إلى ممارسات جديدة في التعليم، إلى البحث عن حلول جديدة في التعليم، لربما كان قبل ذلك متردداً إزاءها، كان يعني رجل إلى الأمام ورجل إلى الخلف في هذا. بعد هذه الجائحة، وإن شاء الله مرورها بشيء من السلام، ما الذي تعتقدينه، ما الممارسات التي تعتقدين أنها ستبقى؟ ما الممارسات التي قد تختفي؟ وكيف قطاع النشر عموماً الذي تأتينا منه، كيف يعيد اختراع نفسه الآن ليستمر، ليستطيع العيش؟
نعم، شكراً. بعتقد أنه كل القطاعات مرقت بنفس البوش أو لازم نروح ونبلش نستعمل ديجيتال، مش بس الهاير إديوكيشن. بس بعتقد أنه الشيء اللي رح يبقى معنا من بعد ما تمرق هيدي المرحلة على خير هي إلها علاقة بهالجلوبال لابوراتوري اللي صار. كل القطاعات وخاصة قطاع وبالأخص قطاع الهاير إديوكيشن اضطر يتعلم on the go. اضطروا الأساتذة، اضطروا التلاميذ، اضطروا كل الستيك هولدرز اللي لهم علاقة بهذا المجال يتعلموا بحالتها. ريسيرش اجى ممكن مع الوقت أو بعدها، بس الترايل اند ايرور اللي صار بوقتها وهالليرنينج اكسبيرينس اللي صارت بدها تكمل، وهذا الشيء رح يحط حجر اساس، او حط بالاحرى اوريدي حجر اساس لمستقبل الديجيتايزيشن، لمستقبل سيرفيسز تنعطى بهذا المجال، اكثر من انه والله بس ننتقل من كتاب فيزيكال لاي بوك او هيك. سو هيدا الليرنينج اكسبيرينس رح يضل. اللي رح يضل كمان هو قدرتنا بالجامعات على انه نوصل لاكبر امكانيه من التريننج والاب سكيلينج والريسكيلينج للاساتذه وللتلاميذ للتحضير للمستقبل، بدون ما نضطر نروح من مطرح للثاني، من دون ما نضطر كجامعات نحط او كانستتيوشنز نحط بادجتس كثير عاليه تنعمل ريسكيلينج واب سكيلينج اللي بيشتغلوا معنا الستيك هولدرز تبعنا، لانه انجبرنا نضطر نحضر ونكون بارت من ويبينارز، من سيمينارز اونلاين كلهم عم بيصيروا، وقدرنا ناخذ هيدا الليرنينج. هيدا رح يكفي كمان. يلي رح يكفي كمان إنه في كتير هيدي بوصلها كمان بالببلشرز شو رح يعملوا أو شو عملوا. كتير من الببلشرز قبل الجائحة بلشوا بالديجيتال ترانسفورميشن، بارت من الفيجنز تبعهم، بارت من الريستراكشرز تبعهم كانت كيف بدنا نحن نحول كل الاوفرينجز تبعنا من اشياء فيزيكال لاشياء اكثر ديجيتال. بالنسبه لإلي انا بشوف الموضوع هو اللي بلشوا قبل كوفيد، اللي بلشوا بكوفيد ولا بعدين، كيف نحن بنعطي السيرفيسز. مش كتاب لبي دي اف ولا بي دي اف لاي بوك، هي سيرفيس كامل. انا ببلش مين هن ستيك هولدرز عندي بهيدا المجال، كببلشر، كجامعه، كجفرمنت، شو هن ستيك هولدرز اللي نحن عم نشتغل معهم، وكيف بننتقل من اني اعطيهم كتاب ليعلموا فيه بهيدي الجامعه لاعطيهم اونلاين انفايرمنت ليفوتوا كلهم وينعمل انجيجمنت فيه. كيف فيني اعطي هالتلميذ كتاب انا فيني ادرس فيه لحالي او فيني ادرس فيه بس بفيس تو فيس مع استاذي، لتشات رومز انا فيني فوت فيها مع الاف التلاميذ بهيدا المجال بجامعتي او بغير جامعات، ببلدي او بغير بلدان. فالموضوع هو هالسيرفيس يلي الببلشرز بيقدموه، يلي بيحاكي المسائل اللي عم نجرب نحلها، مش بيحاكي بس حل لكورونا، هو الحل لهالمسائل الأكبر بالتربية اللي نحن عم نجرب نحلها كببلشرز، كجفرمنت، كeducation institutions moving forward.
شكراً جزيلاً، شكراً. سأنتقل بسؤال لأستاذ كريستوبال كوبو. You have extensively worked on understanding the future of learning, cultures of innovation, human-centered technologies in both the developing and developed countries. One key observation the education world noted during the COVID-19 era is that many students and countries who didn't have access to an infrastructure really, they like went missing in action. They didn't learn. Learning has not happened. The learning loss and even school deprivation and all of that is huge. What can we do to decrease that inequality or inequity and allow education to reach farther?
And I think we have to unpack it in parts. When I received the invitation to be here, at the beginning I thought it was a webinar. It was an event online. I was trying to find the link, and I was very happy to see it was going to be a face-to-face experience because it's totally different. Looking at people's face or people's mask is much more interesting than being in front of a screen. I think that says a lot about how is the learning experience. What can we get out of technology and what could be out of the expectations? The inspiration that technology will revolutionize education is not new. It has at least 100 years when Edison in 1922 foresaw that education was going to be improved in terms of effectiveness 100% because of the integration of motion picture. And we have been in that expectation for years. Now, with the pandemic, many countries, if not most, have really invested in technology to offer solutions to enable remote learning. However, the implementation in many cases has been highly improvised, patchy, incomplete, and in many cases based on the learning loss, quite ineffective. Now, I think it's also fair to say that before the pandemic, we already had a crisis. We discussed it earlier. Over 50% of 10-year-old kids in low and middle-income countries before the pandemic couldn't understand a simple text. This is what we call the learning poverty. Now, with the long school closure, the loss was seriously harmed, but not only on the cognitive side. Serious social-emotional pressure, high levels of students drop out, and it's fair to say that millions of students lost access to daily meals that were provided by the school. So the main concern is this learning poverty can increase from 50 to up to 70%. And I think in that regard, it's fair to try to analyze what can we do differently. But before that, I think it's essential to understand that many countries, and within the countries, many regions, really struggle on this digital divide that on one level has to do with access to infrastructure, connectivity, even electricity, access to devices and platforms, but on the other level, we have this massive digital skills gap among students and among teachers, students as well. Now, this digital skills approach is not only learning how to use these tools, but probably more importantly, learning how to think with these tools, learning how to distinguish between information and opinion, how to separate the signal from the noise. And this is also important for teachers. This is like in the aircraft, you have to put your oxygen mask before helping somebody else. So in that regard, I believe the e-publishing industry has a lot to contribute in this discussion. In terms of we have to, say, if we want to really scale, we have to have the inclusion approach at the top. In terms of diversity of languages, in terms of designing solutions that can be offline friendly or printed friendly, and the pandemic has been critical, and also designing licenses that would allow us to translate these materials for minority languages, which I think is still a huge struggle. So in a nutshell, I think what we have learned out of this pandemic is it's time to reinvent human connection. It's not that technology will replace any kind of interaction, but we have to develop new capacities and we have to be open for serious transformations.
Thank you. Shukran jazilan. John, we come to you now. So you represent Alif here, which is this big company in the UAE trying to find AI-powered solutions and innovations of things we can expect for the future in the educational field. And we are expecting it to solve some issues as well that have to do with emotional well-being, social emotional well-being, accessibility, equity, all of that, learning poverty. So what do you do?
Good question. Well, I think the question about looking into the future and where are AI-powered innovations taking us really depends on to what extent the present affords us the luxury of looking into the future. As my co-panelists have been saying, as you mentioned in the introduction, you know, we have some really pressing needs which were there before the pandemic started. So in Alif, you mentioned that we're a large organization in the UAE. So we process around up to 100 million data points through our platform. We have around 500,000 students using the platform every day in classrooms. And there are some things that stick out immediately, which I think we should keep in mind as we turn the page to think about where can AI really make a difference. So we know, for example, that there is a clear gender gap in terms of learner performance from grade 5 through to grade 12 in schools. So grade 5, girls and boys are more or less equivalent in terms of their competence and performance in classroom, but the gap begins to widen to the extent that by the time we reach grade 12, there is a gap between girls and boys, and it's boys who are out in front, actually, it's not the girls. That's one thing to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind is student performance and gaps in performance by geographical location. So we're able to pinpoint how effectively students perform, and we're able to assess their learning based on their location. And it may not come as much of a surprise to hear that students who are in city or densely populated areas generally outperform those who are in the countryside. So those are just a couple of examples of some of the pressing issues of the present. Turning to the future and how can AI innovations support us, there's a whole host of things to think about, but I think, as Al mentioned at the beginning, pathways, learning pathways. So how can AI help teachers plot the best course of action or the most significant type of intervention in class to support those learners who need support? Another interesting development, and one that I'm passionate about, is generative language technologies. So most of us know and recognize Elon Musk as the Tesla icon, but one of his other organizations is called OpenAI. And this is an incredibly interesting area for publishers who I think perhaps have been a little bit complacent over the years. And one way to take that, and one use case for us in education and publishing in the region, is imagine a situation where students who typically have been using one pre-published resource with their teachers in classroom all of a sudden have an opportunity to receive instantly generated language learning exercises that are designed with their specific needs in mind. So we all talk about personalized learning, and it's, I think, a used and abused term, but I think generative language technologies really gives us a chance to deliver genuinely personalized learning. So that's an introduction to what we're doing in Aleph.
Thank you very much. While we wait for ننتظر لأسئلة من الحضور الكريم، سأسأل بعد سؤال آخر نفس الشيء للجميع. أحب أن أسمع آراءكم فيه. الخطوة الثانية، الخطوة الآتية، أعرف أنه قيل اليوم كثيراً أننا الآن نحن على مفترق طريق، نقف وننظر إلى عالم جديد آت. الخطوة التالية في التعليم وتكنولوجيا التعليم ما هي؟ يعني أنا لنفترض أنا شخص تربوي، أستاذة في الجامعة، ماذا نتوقع؟ ما الذي نفعله؟ علماً أن الشيء الأهم في كل ما نفعله نحن كناس في عالم التربية والتعليم، أهم شيء أننا نريد تعليماً أو تعلماً له معنى. طيب، أين نذهب الآن في هذا العالم؟ Al.
Thank you. It might be a slightly contentious one, but one thing I'm used to when we look around the world at international systems is we're quite quick to measure around things like PISA. So where do all of our children achieve at a certain age point on their academic curriculum? And I think we need to reset slightly and think, what actually are we trying to measure? And then there's a lot of work now being focused around the measurement really should be about a system where a school system where a child flourishes. And we've chosen today to talk about aspects that relate to not just the academic attainment, but the social, emotional, mental health of a young person, the skills they need to acquire to be fit for the workplace, to challenge the validity of data, and in doing so, develop confidence themselves. The way that technology can feed, that we're looking at people learn in different ways, so different tools. So I think one of the measures, and it's a really difficult one, but I know with the strength of leadership you have here, it's one that's probably quite attainable, is to really consider, first and foremost, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve students that leave with the most knowledge attained? Or are we trying to achieve with a system where students are most rounded? And that, without being simplistic, does dictate some of the pathways you take, the priorities you take in terms of the content, the things you want to share. But it has to be discussed. And I think that's a key.
ده جواب حكيم. شكراً. تفضلي بيسان.
شكراً. بعتقد بالإضافة لنحن شو عم نجرب نحقق، لمين عم نجرب نحقق هيدا الشيء، وشو هن النيدز، شو هن الاحتياجات تبع المستخدمين لهيدا الديجيتال يعني البرودكت اللي نحن عم نطلعه. شو عم نحقق ولمين، وشو هن الحاجات تبع هيدا المستخدم ليقدر يوصل للمستقبل. هلا هون السؤال كتير بيصير عام، شو هو المستقبل واي كاريرز بدهم يروحوا عليهم اليوزرز تبعنا. يعني السؤال كتير كبير، والسؤال كتير ما فيه جواب واحد، بس فيه هو نطلع نحن على هالسكيلز اللي فينا نعطيهم اياهم ليتعلموا كيف يتعلموا اي شيء بالمستقبل، لنعطيهم شويه فلويديتي فلكسبيليتي بالتايم مانجمنت ليقدروا يكونوا انتربرينورز للمستقبل. يعني الجواب ما فيه منه واحد وخالص، بس هو نضلنا نحن كببلشرز وكانستتيوشنز كجوفرمنتس along the way بكل الطريق عم نطلع اليوزر تبعنا شو هو بحاجه، شو هن التولز اللي لازم ياخذهم ليقدر يتامن له مستقبل افضل.
شكرا. John, would you like to?
Thank you. Yes. Well, one word: ecosystem. I think one of the unique aspects of the work we do in the UAE at Aleph Education is that we are end-to-end. So yes, we are content and learning. Yes, we are about developing a really fantastic K-12 curriculum, but we're also about what happens in the classroom from a hardware point of view. We have a huge team of what we call digital learning implementation specialists, who in the old world used to be called teacher trainers. But the fact that we've had to change the title reflects that there's so much more that's needed if we're really to make a difference on the ground where it counts the most. So a lot more to say on that, but I think that what we really must focus on in education technology is ensuring that there is an adequately funded ecosystem with a strong vision and strong leadership from the top to really drive the on-the-ground delivery of that.
شكرا. تفضل.
I agree very much with my colleagues, but let me emphasize 4 elements which I think are essential. One is highly decentralization. What is happening with the jobs today is happening or will happen at some stage with education, decentralization of certifications, decentralization of the contents and the infrastructure. The second one has to do with blended. We have learned the opportunities of blendedness, moving away from either online or face-to-face, and this combination is much more constant and much more nuanced, if you want. The third one has to do with our different relationship with content. Content is not the king anymore, it's a capacity of selecting, curating, analyzing in a critical way the content. And finally, preparing learners to ask new questions and not necessarily to memorize what is in the books. And that has to do with self-driven learning and people who are aiming for new explorations, pushing the boundaries, I think is essential for the future of education.
شكراً. قبل أن ننتقل إلى سؤال الجمهور، لدي سؤال أخير بجواب سريع. سببه كلمة إيكو سيستم التي أو المنظومة المتكاملة التي ذكرها أستاذ جون. هل تعتقدون فعلاً أنه هناك إيكو سيستم، منظومة متكاملة اليوم؟ هل فعلاً الجامعات تتكلم مع عالم النشر، تتكلم مع يتكلمون مع بعضهم فعلاً؟ وكيف كل هذا الحديث اليوم عن الإبداع وأفكار جديدة والعالم الجديد الذي ينتظرنا، وما زال أبناؤنا، أنا أتكلم لأن بناتي في الجامعة فأعرف الحاصل، لازم ياخذوا GRE و SAT و GMAT وكل هذه الامتحانات التي تعتمد على المحتوى لربما أكثر من أي شيء آخر، امتحانات تحصيل ربما. هل فعلا يتكلمون مع بعض؟
أنا بعتقد إذا فيني بلش، أنا بعتقد إذا الشركات إذا بدنا نعتبرهم publishers، بس يعني شركات اللي بتعنى بهذا المجال، إذا بتكون عم تطلع عن جد بالحاجات يلي هالجامعات بحاجة لها، الحاجات يلي كل ستيك هولدرز بالتربية بالمجال التربوي بحاجة لها، بيصير في هيدا الكوميونيكيشن بتزبط. ومنشوفها بكذا مطرح، في تشانلز موجودة، في تشانلز بدها تتحسن، ما فينا نقول لا وما فينا نقول فولي ايه. مثل ما قلت من شوي انه الهدف هو انه نضلنا نحن نطلع على حاجات هيدا اليوزر، بس كمان نضلنا معتبرين انه هيدا الموضوع هو موضوع بده يضل عنده مراجعة. ما فيه خط نهائي وصلنا للحل وخلص. الاشياء اللي عم تطلع من الواقع اللي نحن عايشينه عم تخلق لنا واقع جديد كل شوي نقدر نتعاطى معه. فإذا نحن عن جد مرنين بعقولنا وبالحلول اللي بنحطها ومنضلنا حاطين بهدف هالنيد، الكوميونيكيشن بتزبط، لأنه إذا عم نحط حل للحاجة في كوميونيكيشن بدها تصير.
شكراً. Any others?
I can share from a perspective of in other regions, and I think one of the first thing that happens is often we're in our enthusiasm to implement change. It's very easy for that change to come top down. We're going to do this, we're going to implement content, resources, and so on. And I think in the most effective systems, it tends to be where there's that co-production, where it starts with staff actually understanding within educational institutions why we're introducing new resources or new capacity, what the benefits are of those tools. They have confidence in use of them first. That original demand is co-produced with learners, so there's actually an evidence base about why we're introducing. And more often than not, and it sounds perhaps difficult coming from someone who spent 30 years promoting EdTech as the solution to many things, actually sometimes less is more. It's actually about building confidence in the resources you've got and the tools that you've got that then provide you with the foundations and layers to build subsequently on that. I think in the broader publishing sector, I think one of the things that I've heard mentioned a few times is about consistency. I mean, one of the things is we've got rich resources in different places and we talk about the barriers to adoption. You know, and I'm very much a case of thinking, well, one of the biggest stimuli for a young person learning is context that they can relate to, whether it's culturally, historically, whatever the information is, they can buy into it and they feel it's for them. And so from that point of view, the more open we make our systems, and maybe that puts an onus on vendors and publishers to facilitate easy access of content, the easier it will be to ultimately work to this joined-up ecosystem where things can be shared, including the supporting content more easily.
So briefly, I think there's no change without some level of resistance and tensions, and I think we have to budget for the time that requires those proper transformations. The Minister of Education needs to learn a lot from the publishing sector, but also in the other way around. I think we have to build partnerships in ways that allow us to think more in this 2010 and not only on the 70 on the model that we have already implemented, and in that sense I think we can make the transformations that are required.
شكراً. John, anything?
If you're a parent, you will know that the system of credentials is broken. And there's no easy solution to it, but blockchain might be one. I'll leave it at that.
شكراً. Thank you. ننتقل إلى سؤال الجمهور. لدينا سؤال واحد مفتوح لحضراتكم جميعاً. What is your comments regarding this? New learning platforms have raised the issue of equal opportunities, those who own the technology and the means to log in and those who don't. I know Cristobal, touched on this, عرض قليلاً لهذا. So, تفضل. من عنده ومن ليس عنده. Those who have and those who don't.
I can share a perspective that's something that's actually very relevant right now, and we're seeing in the UK. The context of digital equity, and we talk about the fact that there are some things within the control of the educational establishment, and that can be about diversifying the content, both in the published as well as the digital sense. And then alongside that, there's the government, the political structures that allow for equity of access in terms of connectivity and devices, depending on your socio-economic profile. But actually, the bigger question really is, as we move forward, we talk about the opportunity for new resources, whether it's in augmented reality or the metaverse or other places where our content that we're curating can be shared and exposed in different ways. And on one hand, there's a huge opportunity, but actually that opportunity has the potential to both enrich, but also extend that divide. So I think we have to make sure at the very baseline that we're looking and saying and recognizing that equity of access is key if we want to have a system and a structure that allows everybody to access the same content and develop based on their own inherent skills. So we can look at both opportunity and challenge, but I think it's really important that from a national perspective, we recognize in the same way we think of electricity and water and light, we should be thinking connectivity is a baseline for a child.
Excellent. صح، هي جزء الآن لربما حق ستصبح من حقوق الأفراد عالمياً. Who would like to respond? Cristobal?
Sorry. So I think one of the things that we learned during the pandemic is education is an intensive human endeavor, and parents have played such an important role in the equation of technology, even when it's accessible at home. I think the first thing to ask, which sounds redundant but is essential, is why? Why do we want to provide technology? What is the goal? What is the expectation? And based on that, we can design more approachable solutions. The second element has to do with be sure to integrate the teachers in the equation. Maybe the role of the teachers is different to the one that it used to be 10, 20, 30 years ago, but the role of teachers is essential. The third one has to do with what was already mentioned, the idea of the ecosystem. There's no champions here. There's the result of a collaboration. Now, if we want to do transformations and we want to scale, we have to have an inclusive approach. We have to ask ourselves who is left behind and what are the actions that we need to consider. And finally, as it was presented a minute ago, we have to be data-driven. There's so much that the industry can learn from other industries, like aviation or pharmaceutical industry, where the data is very intensive. I think we can borrow some of these practices into education as well.
شكراً. بسام؟
بدي أكد لأنه كان في فكرة من اللي بدي أقوله انحكت هلا إنه يمكن الانفراستراكشر شو هي الأكسس الواي والهاو وكان بدي ركز كتير على الدايفرسيتي اند انكلوجن بهذا المجال. اجين انا على طول بتطلع على الموضوع from a user perspective، مين ما كان اليوزر، مين ما كان هالستيك هولدر، كيف نحن كدور نشر او كشركات عم نعمل كونتنت يوصل للجميع وين ما كان هيدا الجميع وشو ما كانت حاجاته الخاصة.
جميل. John.
Thank you. Well, I would say that accessibility and equity are the starting line, not the finishing line. And one of the things I've noticed moving from print to digital sphere in publishing over the last few years is that technology, it answers a lot of problems, but it's the medium, not the message. And I think that there are some universal issues that we face in education which can only really be solved, as I said earlier, by building the right ecosystem so that we can bring together the best in content and the best in technology and really properly train teachers and bring parents into the circle of trust. We haven't mentioned much about parents, but they play a really significant role. So there's a lot to say on all of that, but so many moving parts, and I think it's vital that at the national level, at the policy writing level in countries that all stakeholders are consulted and that proper plans are put in place so that investment goes in all the right places.
شكراً جزيلاً. وبهذا نصل إلى ختام هذا اللقاء وهذا الحديث معكم. شاكرة جداً لهذا الحضور الفكري الأنيق. سعيدة بحضوركم معنا. كريستوبال كوبو، آل كينغزلي، بيسان قربان، جون راسل. شكراً جزيلاً.
Thank you so much for our moderator and our panelists for this great discussion. عن جد ما أجمل اللغة العربية وهذا الميكس كان جدا رائع. Thank you so much. فعلا كانت هيدي البانل رائعة جدا، خاصة لما حكيتوا عن الكريدنشلز لكل الأهالي، خاصة أنا كأم هالموضوع كثير بيعني لي وكل التوبكس you have covered. It was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you once again to our keynote speakers and panelists who have generously shared their knowledge and experience with us so far. It is now time for lunch, so please enjoy your lunch. It's going to be served in the conference across this hall, Conference Hall B. We hope you enjoy the break. Please be back here by 1:30. صحتين, bon appétit, and see you soon. شكراً.